A man approaches a girl and invites her to play. He tells her to do as he tells her. Her father tells Ellie not to answer, just to listen to him. Then he asks if she understands. The little girl clenches her fists and replies that she understands. The main character's name is Ellie. She believes she's a living doll. Her purpose in life is to do as she's told, and so she's forgotten how to speak. The girl is illiterate, and her family always bullies her. The mother, screaming, asks her daughter why she doesn't understand what she told her. The girl replies that it's a secret, but she still can't tell anyone. Her father insists that being mute has its advantages. The main character is a mute doll named Ellie who can do nothing but listen silently. The girl met 3 men in her life who trusted her. Lennon was fascinated by puzzles and riddles. He had black hair and scarlet eyes. The Labrador had some piquant hobbies that are not usually talked about. Hayden was blonde and had sea green eyes, and he liked men. The protagonist became the savior of their souls, but her own soul turned into a cesspool as a result. Ellie didn't understand how to escape this hell because she knew she couldn't live like this any longer. She had to say goodbye to the mute commoner, Ellie. The main character is now Countess Wu, who has everything, status and money. The boy turns to the girl and asks if she is Ellie. The Countess replies that he, sir, is mistaken, and then she turns around and says her name is Countess Favor. And at that moment, he thought that the mute Ellie he knew was dead. The main character remembered that Ellie was just a doll, and that she was meant to listen, not speak. She wasn't born that way and could speak until she started playing a certain game. A father asks his daughter if she wants to play. And when she was 5 years old, her dad suggested she play a simple game. The little girl looked at her father and agreed. He said that there were rules, and she had to adhere to them from now on. Just listen to what he said and remain silent. Then he asked if it wasn't too much trouble. The man took the girl by the hands and said that now she should keep her mouth shut and listen. Father, screaming, says that bastard Baron has humiliated him again, and he swears that if he didn't have that damned family, he would have quit long ago. And screaming, he says he hates them all. The little girl's father, the Baron's secretary. But this is only in title, while this honorary position is actually his servant's job. At the end of the working day, the Baron threw 5 silver coins on the ground, and then praised him and said that he was a good boy. At this time, the man felt insulted and quietly said that they were damned rogues. The father, screaming, tells his daughter to respect others and not follow bad examples. Then he asks how much longer she'll continue to terrorize him. At this time, the main character thought that she should not be afraid because she believed that this was just a game. The father sighed with relief and said he felt better. He then praised the girl, saying she was a good girl for sitting still and listening to him until the end. Ellie turns to her father and thanks him, but he reminds her that he told her to keep quiet. The girl claims that they have already played and asks if that is true. The man insists that silence is a talent and she should develop it. He suggests that from now on, she try to talk less, as he won't stop completely. He believes one might say that she was born for this. So the game continued, and time passed, but it still didn't end. Her sister and mother played it with her, too. A mother told her daughter that she has a boyfriend and that she loves him, not her father. And that's why she's been thinking about committing suicide for a long time. Just as family members are expected to confide their secrets to their bride, Ellie's relatives became engrossed in this, expressing all their grievances, secrets, and grief to her. And at some point, she realized she'd forgotten how to speak. The protagonist realized she no longer knew how to speak. At first, she was overcome with despair, but she also felt pride. And her father was now proud of her achievement, that she had become mute, and he considered it a blessing beyond her wildest imagination. Ellie quickly got used to her lack of speech. Although she considers it a flaw, at least she could write and read. Everyone called the girl Mute Ellie, and they needed her to express their emotions. One day when she was 17, her father offered her something new. He told Ellie to show her talent to everyone and please them. At this point, the main character realized that she was just a mute girl who couldn't reveal other people's secrets. She'd been doing this since childhood, and it was the only thing she knew how to do. The girl thought that if she tried to refuse her father, the head of the family, he would sell her into slavery. One day, daughter heard from her father that her mother still believed her 3rd child had died of poisoning. But if we were to put it that way, he'd sold him to slave traders. Dad asks if she remembers him screaming. Then she reports that he could make those piercing, maddening sounds for hours. The man explains that he made this decision because they couldn't afford a third child anyway, and that child would live in poverty with them. He assumes his son will grow up in a wealthy home and will always be well fed and clothed. The father explains that it was difficult for him to do this, and it is not easy for him to sell his own child, and asks if she understands. Then he begins to cry. The girl understood that if she ceased to be useful to him, he would sell her into slavery, and all she could do was obey. Ellie had to listen silently to someone else's sorrows, someone not in her family this time, and to prevent her from seeing them, she was blindfolded. And since this service was well paid, her father could pay off his debts. The protagonist wondered who he was, who needed her silence since she hadn't left the house in a long time. Her father never wanted her to leave. Her sister offered to wash the dishes for her because she was worried the whole family felt guilty about her and excused her from any work. And so the main character could only look out the window. And sometimes she went out to tend the flowers. When her father saw her in the yard, he screamed and asked how many times he told her not to step out of the house. Then he took the girl and pushed her inside the house. At this point, Ellie doesn't understand why he doesn't want to let her go. This has happened many times, but she couldn't resist her father. Sitting in the carriage, the girl thought that they had already arrived, but her eyes were closed and she could not see anything. Someone offered the lady a hand, and she realized she was being helped out of the carriage, but she felt the hand soft and thought it wasn't the same person as last time. She wondered if it might even be a woman. The girl kept walking and became curious about where they were taking her. But then she heard a voice asking if she was comfortable. The lady realized that it was a man's voice, and his hand was so gentle, and therefore it seemed to her that it was a woman. The main character felt someone touching her, and then realized her blindfold was being removed. The man said he would help her. Ellie saw a boy with blonde hair and sea-green eyes. He said his name was Hayden and invited her to sit down. The girl looked at him and thought that he was very handsome and that he was probably an aristocrat. And they were alone in the room. Ellie looked at the guy and didn't understand what was happening because he had a gloomy look. Hayden says, before we get down to business, he wants to ask you something. The guy says he was told that she is mute and cannot write, and so he wants to know if it is true. Hearing this, the main character reflected on how she could write, albeit with difficulty. But she realized he didn't need to know that. The gentleman says he and her father signed a contract. Therefore, he sympathizes with her and suggests that she remember that this secret must never be revealed. Hayden says he thinks it's only fair to tell her more about this agreement. Then he tells her that if she tells anyone what he's told her, she'll die, because he'll know for sure that she was the one who spilled the beans because no one else knows. The main character looked at the guy and thought he might kill her, because she thought that's how he sounded. And looking at his eyes, she realized he'd killed before. The young gentleman asks Ellie if she's figured it all out. Yet meanwhile, she's thinking about how everyone has secrets, no matter whether they're handsome young men or wizened old men. There will always be secrets, no matter how many there are. The main character believes that the more terrible the secret, the greater the desire to know about it. And she believes that this is probably his problem. Hayden says he'll proceed with the confession, and then reveals that he thinks he's attracted to men, and he likes men. The young gentleman says he's seen his deepest secret revealed to a stranger, and he doesn't know if she thinks he's strange. He believes that if he didn't tell someone this secret, he'd feel like he'd simply perish. So his heart was breaking with the desire to speak out. I heard that the main character felt sympathy for him at that time, and she didn't condemn him for being gay. She was simply sad to see a man alone. Ellie realizes that she is only a listener, and she is not surprised, and cannot do anything. The girl recalls that this all stems from her past. After all, her father constantly scolded her for trying to support and comfort him. One day, her dad grabbed her by the shoulders and screaming asked who needed her worthless words of support. After this, the girl realized that people trusted her with their secrets, not so that she could console them, but simply to lift the weight from their hearts onto her. From then on, the main character no longer expressed her own feelings or tried to console others. Hayden says he was in so much pain that he often considered ending his life. But then he heard about Ellie from her father, who assured him that his daughter was so smart that she could listen to any secret and not tell anyone. At this time, the main character realized that her father was talking about her ability in front of such high-ranking gentlemen The young master says that since she's from the rabble, that gives him even more confidence. After all, rumors from the nobility spread like wildfire. But the fact is, they won't listen to a commoner, and they won't believe her, even if she tries to tell them. Hayden says he doesn't blame her if she thinks he's a coward, because he is. At that moment, the girl thought about what she didn't think. The young gentleman thanks the lady and says he'll tell her more. He then explains that for the first time, he realized something was wrong with his attraction. 5 years ago, when Hayden was riding horses with his friends, he felt when he looked at a guy in white jockey pants, and he was so excited that it clouded his mind. His body was burning with fire, and at the same time he was paralyzed by shame. The young gentleman says that from that moment on, he realized he was attracted to men, and every time he sees an attractive man, he feels lust and hates himself for it. The guy says he tried to have relationships with girls, but over time it became completely clear that he only liked men. Then he claims he tried to change. The aristocrat says he's the second eldest in the family, and his father demands he compete with his brother and be better, since that's the only way he can become the head of the family. And until then, his reputation must be as pure as a mountain stream. Hayden says he's fallen in love, then puts his hand to his heart and says that love is like a whirlpool. And he looks at this guy and feels like his prisoner, and he thinks that this love is like his destiny. The young gentleman asks what he should do. Meanwhile, the heroine looks at him and remains silent, not even moving or showing any emotion. Ellie understands that she can only look at him and cannot help him in any way. The main character doesn't understand what love is and wonders what it's like to have feelings for someone. But there were times when she thought her hellish life had gotten better. The girl understands that there was never any love in her family, but sometimes she resigned herself to it and tried to simply live like mute Ellie and be happy. However, the main character started talking again and started meeting people because she just wants to be like everyone else. Suddenly, the father grabbed the girl by the shoulders and said that the gentleman had praised her today and therefore wanted to see her again tomorrow. Moreover, another high-ranking gentleman had expressed interest in her today. Father says that many men dream of meeting her. The main character came to see Hayden the next day. He invited her to sit down and then explained that he'd been suffering from insomnia for several years. But because he was able to open his soul to her, Ellie could finally sleep peacefully. The aristocrat says he himself was surprised by the peace his soul finds when he reveals a secret, and that's why he desperately needed someone like her. But he understands that finding one himself is nearly impossible. The young gentleman says that at times his love for him consumed him from the inside. But even so, he would give anything to kiss him just one more time, and so he desires it more and more with each passing day. Hayden asks if this is hypocrisy. Then he says he hates his misguided attraction, but he understands that he needs the kiss of the one he feels it for. The guy asks Ellie if she's ever been kissed. She shakes her head. He asks if she wants to kiss him. Then she says yes, of course with consent. The young gentleman says that his problems would be solved if he only learned to love women. The guy says that he has tried to love the girl many times, but he doesn't feel anything, and therefore he thinks that maybe she is different, and he will succeed. And then he asks if she doesn't mind if he sits next to her. Hearing this, the main character thought that he was very tactful, and looked at him and nodded her head in agreement. The young gentleman offered to tell her if he could kiss her. At that moment, the girl reflected on how she'd never really talked to men, much less kissed them. The girl recalls that one day she was in her garden, and a young man approached her, greeted her, and told her that she had beautiful flowers in her garden. He then gave her a basket, saying it was from his mother. When the dad saw the guy, he screamed and told his daughter to go into the house right now. Her father was always afraid that she would meet a man and run away with him, and so he restricted her from any communication with men. The protagonist wonders what it would be like to touch another person's lips, and she realizes that if she does today, she might never know what a kiss is. A guy kissed a girl on the lips, and she realized it was a kiss. He says that if she were a guy, he would fall in love with her, but because this kiss didn't make him feel anything. At that moment, the girl thought about what he didn't like. The young gentleman invited her to meet again in a couple of days. And at that moment, she thought about how she wanted to show him that she would support him, but she couldn't tell him anything. At this point, the aristocrat began to cry, and said he thought he sensed she wanted to tell him something. Then he heard her comfort him. Ellie approaches the boy and wipes the tears from his cheeks. And at that moment, she thinks he's simply fallen in love and thinks there's nothing wrong with it. The girl thought about how, when she thinks she's falling in love with someone, she starts to hate herself, and this feeling scares her more than death. The next day, sitting in the carriage, the main character remembers her father's words, that if everything goes as it should, then he will finally be able to quit this damned Baron. Tomorrow they are going to the pub with her, and there their golden client will be waiting for her. Ellie wondered who it was this time, and suddenly she remembered Hayden and his kiss, and she thought that if someone asked her if she wanted to kiss him again, she would say yes. The lady thought that she would like to be the one Hayden desired. The man said they had already arrived, and when the girl entered the room, she thought it stank, and she had never been to a pub before. Sitting at the table, the young lady does not understand where he is and why he has not arrived yet. And after a few minutes, a guy with black hair and scarlet eyes approached her. Seeing him, the main character thought that this was the client her dad was talking about. He says, "So she's that good listener." Then he apologizes for addressing her informally. Then he asks if she wants to be formal. Ellie nodded her head, and he realized that she wanted to be addressed informally. The young gentleman offers her a seat as he feels embarrassed by her rudeness in front of such a beauty. Then he offers to start over and greets her. The guy says his name is Lennon. He knows she'll never be able to pronounce it, but he felt the need to introduce himself. The young gentleman informs her that he knows her name and suggests that she worry about it since her name is Ellie and she was introduced by her father. He also knows that she was born mute and asks if this is true. Lennon says her father said so. He says he wasn't talkative as a child and was irritated by his family. That's why he thought he was very unlucky in life. But because he was too young, he couldn't do anything about it. The guy said he saw that whatever he said didn't matter, so he spoke less and less. At that moment, the girl thought you wouldn't know it from looking at him. The aristocrat asks if she finds this hard to believe, but he insists it's true, and he has no reason to make things up. Because at some point, he seemed to have a sudden breakthrough and became very talkative, and people began to listen to his opinions. Lennon asks if she knows why. Then he says that his feelings and thoughts need to be expressed, and if he doesn't express them, they might disappear, so he must speak out, come what may, because he believes that if he remains silent, his thoughts and feelings are meaningless. The aristocrat says that if she knew sign language, she would be able to express what's on her mind. Therefore, he believes she desperately needs to learn self-expression. Then he touches her hand. At this time, the main character thought about why he was not indifferent to her at their very first meeting. The young gentleman says he sees she's wondering, and that's why he's telling her this. He also says he came hoping to help her speak after what he heard from her father. He asked him to meet with her. The guy says that she suits him well, and also thinks that she is beautiful. At this time, the main character thought that she was hearing such words for the first time. Lennon says he has a lot to ask her about herself, and sincerely wishes to restore her ability to speak, so he invites her to play a game with him. At this point, the girl realized she didn't know any games except for the mute game. He explained that it was a guessing game. Then he said he really wanted to know more about her, but realized she couldn't answer him, so he assumed he could only guess. Ellie thought he was a strange man, and such were her thoughts, even after she had already agreed to start the game. The aristocrat asks the first question, asking if she thinks he's married. The girl considers that he doesn't have a ring and nods her head in both directions. He replies that he's right. Lennon reveals that he doesn't interact with women except for one with whom he has regular encounters, and without her, his nights would be filled with loneliness. He then asks if she's ever spent the night with a man. The girl again shook her head in both directions, and at that moment remembered that she had been kissed. The aristocrat says he thinks she did. She seemed sad for a moment, and he asks if they were talking about a kiss and unrequited love. At this time, the main character remembered Hayden, who likes men and understands that this is unrequited love if he cannot love her. The young gentleman says she's a poor thing, apparently trapped in unrequited love. Then he asks if they kissed without really knowing each other. The guy looked at the girl and said that, judging by her expression, she really wanted to clarify something. He thought that if they kissed in the heat of the moment, he asked if he had a chance of getting a kiss from her. Lennon says he can do it, and then asks if she wants to. At this point, the girl blushes, and he apologizes for scaring her and explains that he speaks without thinking like before. The aristocrat says it was a serious question, however, and then asks if he can kiss her at their next meeting. He then says he wants to see her again in a more respectable setting, not in this dark pub. The guy smiled and suggested Ellie think about it carefully. He then said it was time for him to also ask if she wanted to meet him again. Lennon said that blind obedience to her father would ultimately be her undoing. However, she knows this better than anyone. Sitting in the carriage, the protagonist can't figure out how to escape this cage. She believes her life has been stuck in stagnation since childhood and continues to be so. So in her dreams, she imagines that one day, someone will take her hand and pull her out of this swamp. Ellie thought that maybe this man was Lennon. When the girl arrived home, she heard screams. She looked into the yard and saw her father kneeling and begging for more time, since he had already said he would pay. The man explains that he would, but this is the umpteenth time he's asked for a deferment. He then informs him that this is the last time he'll give him a month, and if he doesn't pay the full amount, by then there will be consequences. Ellie remembered her father playing cards for as long as she could remember. At first it was just regular bars, but then he got involved with gambling houses. He never stopped, no matter how hard he tried, and it didn't harm his family. The main character believes that saving her family falls on her shoulders as she listens to the outpourings of strangers for money. When his daughter entered the courtyard, her father asked her if she had accidentally let him down today. He told her not to speak, that she should keep her mouth shut, and asked if she understood, because he believed she was the family's only salvation. At this time, the girl looking at those eyes full of madness, she clearly realized that if she did not make money for him, he would sell her into slavery as her newborn sister. Ellie enjoys riding in a carriage, lost in thought about life and her dreams. This is when she has the freedom to do what she wants, and she wants to be wherever she pleases. The young gentleman asks the girl if she's asleep. She shakes her head, no. He smiles and says he thought she did. Lennon reveals that he has a younger brother, and he's quiet and phlegmatic, but he's still his only brother, and even if he doesn't like him, he can't reciprocate. The main character thought she had a sister too, and that's why she understood him, even if she was just a place for her to vent her dirty emotions. The aristocrat says he's annoying, but he's usually the one who starts the conversation. Then he asks her to guess what he said. The young gentleman reportedly told him to close his mitten. At that moment, the girl thought about how he only smiled when he talked about his brother. And she envied his brother, because if she were not a mute commoner, but a noblewoman, she wondered how quickly she would be lost in that smile. Lennon suggests they play a game. Then he asks her if she can guess where he's taking her. She shakes her head. He realizes she doesn't know. The guy says that today they are going to his estate and asks why. And then he says that she will have to think about it herself. When they arrived, the young gentleman got out of the carriage and then offered his hand to the girl so that she could descend. It started raining outside and Lennon opened his umbrella. Then he asked her if she'd thought about his proposal and asked if she'd like to answer him out loud. The guy says he really wants to hear what her voice sounds like. He assumes it must be very gentle and as affectionate as she is. The aristocrat greets the girl and says he's very glad she's come to his family estate. Upon seeing his house, the protagonist is very surprised, as she's never seen such a beautiful and luxurious mansion. Lennon says they don't have a garden as far as she can see, because his younger brother arranged it that way, so he could have more space for horse riding. Hearing this, the main character remembered that Hayden also talked about horse riding. When they entered the house, the girl saw Hayden. She, as well as he, were very surprised. However, he averted his eyes as if he didn't know her. Lennon grabs his brother's hand and asks why he decided to leave without even saying hello. Hayden slaps his hand away and then leaves very quickly, silently. The young master explains that he's disgracing him and that this is the younger brother. He spoke of the half-brother. At that moment, a thought came to Ellie that was embarrassing to even mention. What Lennon had said about his brother, and the way Hayden avoided his gaze and broke away when his brother took his hand. The girl believes that perhaps the secret that Hayden entrusted to her concerns Lennon. As the main character walked down the hallway, she saw portraits of her ancestors and thought they must have come from a very noble family. And on one, she read that Count Hills. I understood that these brothers were earls. While choosing dresses, the aristocrat asks the girl if she can come over for a second. Then he tells her that he and she are going out on business today. Lennon says he will give her money cash expenses, and it is only for her, and suggests that she remember that it is not for her father. Suddenly, a woman enters the room and addresses Lennon Hills, asking when he'll stop fooling innocent girls. Then she asserts that at his age, it's time to think about settling down. The boy turns to his mother and asks how long she's been watching them. Then he claims it's impolite to enter without knocking, and suggests she'd be kind enough to leave them alone. At this time, Ellie thought that this was his mother, and he did not look like her at all. And besides, she was very young. The aristocrat looked at the girl and said he could see she was wondering, then explained that this woman was his stepmother, not his biological mother. He suggested she forget it and put on a dress and return to him. The young master said a maid would help her. When Ellie put on the dress and looked at herself in the mirror, she didn't even recognize herself for a moment, as she'd never seen such beauty, let alone worn it. And she didn't know such beautiful dresses existed. The protagonist realizes it looks expensive and wonders why Lennon decided to give it to her. That's what she thought as she returned to the room and was about to knock, but she noticed the door was unlocked and peeked in. Ellie saw something that shocked her. Lennon was kissing his stepmother, and she was very surprised. The girl entered the room, and the stepmother said it was her and invited her to stay happily. Hearing this, the main character thought about how she looked at her so calmly, as if she wasn't even ashamed to have seen them. The young gentleman was a little nervous and asked Ellie when she returned, and then said that he should have been told. The young lady thought that she had seen something she should not have seen and considered it a big scandal. An aristocrat approaches the girl and asks her to tell him honestly whether she's seen them. Then he asks her to answer one question. He touches her hair and says she knows how to make a person feel like a complete nobody, sir. Lennon says he'll tell her everything. Then he explains that he needs to take away the one he loves most from him because he believes that's the only way to destroy a person. The young gentleman explains that it was with this very intention that he kissed his stepmother. Hearing this, the main character thought Lennon wanted to harm the one who loved his stepmother and therefore kissed her. But she believes he's not happy about it. On the contrary, he looks sad. Ellie walked up to the boy and then touched his face. Then she hugged him. And then she thought that she didn't know what was going on inside him, but she wished he wouldn't be sad. The young gentleman tells the girl that he's seeking revenge on his father. He wants to take away his stepmother's love for him because he killed his mother. He believes he can make him feel this heartbreaking pain. The aristocrat turns to the girl and says that he does not understand why he tells her about this to the one he met only for the second time. Lennon says her father described her perfectly, as she has a real talent for listening, and he has a desire to tell her everything. And at those times, he even wants to pour out his soul to her. The guy asks if he can ask for more than just conversation, and at this point, he looks deeply into her eyes. Then he explains that he really didn't want to kiss his stepmother at all, but the girl touches his lips. The young gentleman says that her perfume makes him sick, and her scent is very attractive. And then he says that he will ask her what she thinks he wants from her. Ellie looked at the guy and didn't understand why he was looking at her like that. He told her he wanted to kiss her and touched her hand. Then he said that if she didn't take her hand away now, he would take it as consent. The protagonist understands that Lennon gave her a choice, and she didn't pull her hand away because she was curious whether his kiss would be as tender as Hayden's. And she hopes that at least Lennon won't regret kissing her. Hearing this, the young gentleman immediately kissed the girl, and his kiss was so sudden. And then he asked if she could leave so that she wouldn't have problems at home later. And he gave her this dress as if she were just a noble lady. The aristocrat announces that today's meeting is over. Then he says that she can go out the front door and the man will take her home. Hearing this, the main character doesn't understand what's happened to his mood. And when she looked after him, she saw that his ears had turned red. As she walked down the hallway, she thought about how flawless Lennon looked. But at the same time, he harbored such a dangerous secret, and he hated his father so much. Just like her, she believed they were alike. The main character thought about what she'd like to tell him about this. But his stepmother resembles someone she knows. She suspects she might be Hayden's biological mother. On the way home, Ellie ponders her curiosity about why Lennon gave her that dress. She also assumes he kissed her because he has feelings for her. But she realizes that on the surface, everything ended the same way as with Hayden. When the girl returned home, she saw her sister kneeling and screaming at her father not to sell her. Seeing this, she couldn't understand what had happened. The sister turns to Ellie and asks her to stop him, and then explains that Dad said he wants to sell her to someone. Her father explains to her that he's decided to marry off her sister. Hearing this, she can't understand what suddenly popped into his head. Then she remembers that the time to repay the debt is approaching, and he hasn't saved anything. So he's decided to sell his family until he repays the debt. The main character understands that now it is just like the last time he sold his child to pay off a debt, and believes that now it is her older sister's turn. The sister turns to Ellie with tears streaming down her face and asks her to help her. At that moment, she thought of her older sister begging on her knees in the rain. The girl recalls that when she didn't like the way she dug up the flower bed, her sister spoke in a completely different tone. The father grabs the girl's hand and tells her that Ellie won't help her, even if they all beg him. Then he tells her to get up because they're waiting for her. As she leaves, Isabella screams and says that her father will not stop, and her little sister will be next. At this point, Ellie thought about how they'd never really interacted like sisters. Still, she thinks she's the one she relates to best in this family. The main character looked at the carriage and thought that she couldn't just let them take it away. The girl touches her father's hand and silently asks him to stop and return her. He says that if she doesn't want him to find her a husband, then she offers to be obedient, and then he tells her that she will live as he tells her. Her father insists she's accomplished her goal for now, then asks if she has any questions. At this point, the girl can't understand how he can do this. She believes they're all just bags of money to her father and understands that she's next. Mom came home drunk that night, and she wasn't looking for Isabella. Ellie looked at her and thought about how she knew everything. And then she remembered her sister's words about how Dad wouldn't stop and that she would be next. The girl realized that her sister's last words were echoing in her head over and over again. She also wondered who her father had sold her to. That night, the main character couldn't sleep after this hectic day, and her thoughts wouldn't leave her. Suddenly, the girl heard a noise and saw that someone had entered her room through the window. A man in a black cloak and black seals covered the girl's mouth and told her to be quiet. At that moment, Ellie thought that he might kill her, and she became very scared. The protagonist thought that maybe this was the solution to escaping this damned life, and then she realized that she simply wanted to relax and hoped that someday someone would understand her. And then they realized that for now, there were no such people. The girl thought she didn't know why she was even alive. The stranger asked in surprise why she wasn't even going to resist. Hearing his voice, the girl realized it belonged to Hayden. The guy asks her if she wants to die, but she doesn't answer, and he says he knows what it's like. Then he throws the knife on the floor and declares he can't kill her. The main character looked at the guy and couldn't understand why he didn't kill her, because she believed it was her only chance to free herself. The man who broke into the girl's room at night says his full name is Hayden Hills. Hearing this, Ellie thought that he and Len really were brothers. The young gentleman says that she seemed to expect him to come to her and therefore was not afraid. The girl recalls that when they met at the front door, she felt it. And at that moment, she really did have such a premonition. The guy tells her it's true, and he's Len Hill's younger brother. He then explains that she knows his secret, and that's why he was afraid she'd tell. The main character heard this and realized he hadn't finished saying he wanted to kill her, but she didn't understand why his hand trembled. And then she remembers his threats, that if she tells anyone she will die, and he will know that she told it because no one else knows about it. Hayden reminds her that he told her it wouldn't cost him anything. However, the young lady doesn't understand why he didn't kill her, but he did try to kill her. Ellie touches his face, and at that moment, she thought that she didn't blame him. But suddenly, Devushka, she heard her father calling her. He was knocking hard on the door and telling her to open it right now. The head of the furnace understands that her father can't see Hayden in her room. He decides he needs to be hidden, then takes her hand. Dad, crying out, asks if Ellie is asleep. Then he tells her to open the door again. Meanwhile, the girl hides the guy behind the curtains. Ellie opened the door for her father, and he asked in surprise why she was closing the door and wondered if she was hiding something from him. The father says he knows she wasn't asleep. Then he moves closer to the girl and says the scene she witnessed today haunts her, and that's why she knew he'd come. Then he asserts that daughter knows him well. At that moment, the girl realized he could only have come for one reason: to confess to selling her sister. The father sat on the bed and said that she was special and not like other children. At that moment, the daughter thought that her father had sat down right where it was wet. The man says that her sister has always been a coward, and she is afraid of men because of such stupidity. Ellie thought that the stupidity he was talking about was actually a reflection of the immense trauma her sister had endured. Ever since she was raped, the sight of men had made her shudder. The protagonist realizes her father sold her into slavery, calling it marriage. He claims a new man will heal her wound, and he did it all for her own good. At this point, the daughter thought about what he did not for her benefit, but to pay off his damned debts, because she understood that she didn't want to go there. The father turns to the daughter, then takes her by the face and tells her not to look away and to listen to him. He asks if she remembers her duties. The man insists that Isabella will be happily married, and thanks to her, their family will be happy too. The father kisses his daughter on the head and sighs with relief, saying that now he will sleep like a log, and then he wishes her good night. At that moment, the girl thought about how her skin was crawling and how she couldn't understand how her father could be like that. She also wondered why she was still playing this game with him. Ellie recalls that at first she played for him to love and praise her, but then she realizes it's no longer a game. The father returns to his daughter's room and then asks why her bed is wet. He wonders if anyone has come to see her. Hearing this, the main character doesn't know what to do. At this point, Hemus comes out and says he's right, and that Ellie is the one who came. The guy explains that he had urgent business with her and a secret he needed to tell her. He then insists that next time he'll warn him. The father was surprised to see the boy, but then said it was him, His Excellency. And since that was the case, it was okay, and she should thank him for coming. Seeing this, the girl couldn't understand why her father was smiling and assumed he was glad Hayden was in her bedroom. The young gentleman asks the man if he could leave them alone, and then explains that he interrupted his conversation with Ellie. The father agrees, and he apologizes very much, but the master must know that his daughter is a virgin and she does not serve high gentlemen at night, and therefore he hopes that he will take her seriously. The father says his daughter is a chaste bride and is worth her weight in gold. Hearing this, the girl is surprised. It also confirms once again that he truly sees her only as a sack of money. After hearing these words, Ellie runs out of the room and into the bathroom. The guy opens the door and asks if this is how she's lived her whole life, and he wonders if that's why she wanted him to kill her. Hayden asks if she thinks death is better than this life. At that moment, the young lady thought about how her life was a cesspool. The young gentleman says he'll help her leave her father, and in exchange she'll continue seeing Lennon and tell him his secret. He says if she agrees, she'll get everything: money, power, and whatever else he can get, because he thinks that with money, she could at least leave. The aristocrat claims that he is forcing her not to, and therefore she will have time to think. Sitting in bed, the girl thought about whether she could reveal Lennon's secret. And she also thought about the fact that maybe Hayden would deceive her. That night, Ellie had a dream that she was running somewhere, and it was a happy dream about freedom. The next day, while tending to the flowers, the girl thought about how she would escape this hell like in a dream, and she wondered if they would find her. The young lady heard someone speaking to her, and she realized it was a familiar voice. When she looked around, she saw a very tall man. The guy says he's so big it's hard to even look at him and asks if that's true. Then he tells her his name is Labrador and he's pleased to meet her. The girl looked at him and thought about how she didn't know him, but he seemed very considerate. Then she offered him her hand and thought it was nice to meet her too. The Labrador shook the girl's hand, and at that moment she noticed that he was looking at her hands and didn't understand what was wrong with them and thought they were too dirty. Suddenly, the guy took her hand, then put it to his face and licked her fingers. The girl doesn't understand what he's doing and takes her hand away. She also thinks he's crazy. The guy apologizes, then explains that her hands are so beautiful that he lost control of himself. He apologizes again and says he didn't do it on purpose. As his father said, she has a gift for hearing secrets. Labrador explains that he came to her specifically about what he just did. Hearing this, the protagonist wondered if he too had come to confess to her. Ellie thought they should go inside. Otherwise, the neighbors might misunderstand if they saw. But suddenly, she remembered her father's words about a chaste bride being worth her weight in gold, and she thought, let people interpret it however they want. The guy looked at the girl and asked what was wrong with her. Then he said that her face was ashen, but she didn't answer and tried to cover her face with her hand. When they arrived at the house, the girl made them some tea, and then they sat down at the table. The young lady doesn't understand why he's silent or where he's looking. The Labrador apologizes and says he doesn't know why her hands captivate him so much. Then he says that actually, he does know, and her hands are perfectly beautiful to him. Hearing this, Ellie thought that this was not how she had imagined his secret, and that was why she considered him a strange man. The guy says he and her father met in a pub. He was fired that day due to an incident with his hands, and he came to the pub to get drunk and complain about his fate. He told him completely drunk that his daughter was his salvation, and that he could tell her any secrets. The father insisted his daughter could relieve him of this pain, so he simply wanted to drop by and arrange a meeting with her, but instead he suddenly touched her hands, which he had previously only dreamed of. At this point, the young lady looked at her hands and realized they were calloused, and she couldn't understand what he'd found there. The Labrador says he knows what she's thinking. Then he reveals that he has certain unconventional preferences. He's embarrassed to admit it, but for him, ideal hands are the kind his mother, who died 5 years ago, had. The boy remembers his mother stroking his hair and says maybe it's because he misses her, and when he sees beautiful hands, he wants to touch them and kiss them. The young gentleman says that of course she didn't think he was her mother's. He didn't touch her hands or kiss them like that, and then he says he doesn't know why he's like that. The guy touches the girl's hands and says she's probably never met anyone as weird as him. At that moment, the girl thinks there's nothing wrong with that. She's seen worse things in her life. The protagonist understands that, compared to her brothers, who pervert family relationships for their own ends, and compared to her father, who sells his daughter to pay off his debts, this creature is a mere trifle. And she sees him as a human being, and he is more human than others. Ellie touches the gentleman's hand and thinks it's a strange phenomenon, but its roots lie in his longing for his mother, and she sees how much he loves his mother. At this point, the Labrador says he doesn't know why he's crying. Then he says she's right, because he loves both his mom and dad, but he still loves his mom, who often pets his head more. The boy said pitifully that the warmth of her arms was no longer with him. At that moment, Ellie thought she envied him, because she didn't understand what a mother's love was like. The girl wondered if she could say that her mother had ever loved her. The Labrador turns to the young lady and says that, of course, she may think that he is strange, but he really asks her to be his. Hearing this, the main character looked at him, and in her gaze, there was a question about who to be. The young gentleman looked at the girl, then smiled, and asked her to be his mistress. He then said he understood, as she was surprised, and promised he wouldn't do anything indecent. The guy says that if she's the girl with perfect hands like his mother, she'll become his mistress, and therefore he'll be saved. Then he explains that when she wants to praise him, she should simply pat him on the head, or she could let him kiss her hand, and that would be enough for his happiness. At this time, Ellie thought that it sounded very strange, but she understands that if in this way she could soften the pain of losing his mother for him. The Labrador says that if she doesn't want it, he'll understand. The girl touches his hand, and at that moment, she thinks about taking her hand and saying yes. The guy was surprised, and then asked if she really wanted to be his mistress. He thanked her, because she was the first person to accept him for who he was. Ellie thought that every time she looked at him, she remembered her little brother, whom her father had sold. He looked so much like her, and she remembered how her brother often fell and held her hand. And in the end, her father sold him and her older sister too. The girl thought that if she replaced the Labrador's mother, then he could replace her brother. The guy says it's in honor of the fact that she agreed to become his mistress. He asks if he can kiss her hand. The main character hesitates to give him her hand. Then she hopes he won't do anything inappropriate with the hand that reminds him of his mother's. The Labrador kissed the girl's hand and then asked his owner if he could meet her tomorrow. Ellie, hearing this, doesn't understand what to do since her father usually decides for her who she sees, and she doesn't understand whether she can answer him what she wants. The next morning, the girl heard her mistress being called. She wondered who had come to see her so early. The guy says he's a Labrador and asks if he's early. Then he apologizes if he is. The Labrador explains that in the army, he woke up very early, and today he woke up even earlier out of desire to see her. At this time, the main character thought that she was a little scared, but she understands that nothing terrible happened, and she is even glad to wake up and have someone nearby. The girl points at his clothes and thinks he's dressed differently today. The guy asks her if she noticed. Then he tells her he chose the nicest clothes, so she'd like them, and he asks her if she likes them. Ellie stroked his head and thought how much he looked like her little brother. He said she praised him, and that made him happy. The Labrador suggests that the girl wake up and do her morning chores for now, and he will go and prepare some simple breakfast, and then they will go for a walk together. The young lady thought that her father would be away for a few days, and therefore believed that this could be done. When the guy has made the soup, he asks the hostess if she liked it. She nods her head, letting him know she liked it. He asks if they're going for a walk now. They went outside, and the guy said that the weather was great today, and thought that he was happy that on this wonderful day he could walk with his mistress and hold her hand. On the street, Ellie saw people laughing and musicians playing, and she realized that this was happiness, the Labrador's warm hand holding her. And she realized that when she was feeling down, she longed for such warm memories in her life. Suddenly, the girl saw the boy stop and remembered that this was the estate of Count Hills. He reported that he worked in this house and hit the Count with his right hand. The Labrador says the gentleman isn't a mean man, but if someone crosses him, he won't leave them alone. And that's how he ended up fired from the service. Upon hearing this, Ellie realized that Labrador was a knight in the service of Count Hills, and so she believes it's a huge coincidence, as she can't understand how all three men who confided their secrets to her are somehow connected to the Count Hills family. The guy suggests the girl leave, as he wouldn't want to be seen at his gate. The lady agrees, as she too has no desire to run into Hayden or Lennon right now. After the walk, the Labrador thanks his owner for agreeing to take him for a walk, then says that today was a happy day, and he'll never forget it. He then says that he'd like to see her tomorrow, but he can't, because he has to attend a banquet. The young gentleman explains that the thing is that according to the rules, he has no right to refuse the invitation, even if he doesn't like it. The main character thought about Hayden and Lennon possibly being at the banquet, and when she got home, she saw a letter asking if she'd thought about why he'd given her the dress, and that's why she should wear it and come. The letter was from Leon Hills. After reading this, the girl smiled and thought about how simple the sentences were. He thought this was a sign of concern, and he had been very caring before. Ellie noticed that her father hadn't returned home yesterday, and the dress department Lennon had given her. She went out to the carriage, which was already waiting for her. The coachman said she hurried because the gentleman had asked her to be on time. Hearing this, the girl doesn't understand the rush and assumes that maybe she and her brother are planning something. Then she decides she's just nervous and needs to calm down. On the way, the lady glanced out the window and remembered that this was the place where she had walked with the Labrador yesterday, and she realized that everything was the same as it had been yesterday, and people were laughing and talking, and musicians were playing. But she realized that she was missing one thing: the touch of the Labrador's hand. The coachman announced that they had already arrived, and Lennon met her at the door. He greeted the lady and said that he had wanted to order the maid to tidy her up, but he saw that it was unnecessary. The young gentleman touches her face and says she is very beautiful. Then he asks her if she can guess where he is taking her, and then he takes her hand. At this time, the girl thought that the young gentleman was dressed formally today, and thought that he probably wanted to go to some event, and that's where he was taking her. Lennon holds the girl's hand and tells her not to be afraid, then asks her to walk faster. She hears music playing, and he asks for the correct answer. The young gentleman announces that he invites her to a reception and that today she is his dance partner. The aristocrat explains that only couples come to this reception, and that's why he invited her. Hearing this, the protagonist doesn't understand why Lennon Hills, the Earl's eldest son, and the one with every chance of inheriting the title, could have chosen any of the noblewomen, but he chose her. Lennon asks the girl to guess why he chose her. At this point, she thinks about how he sometimes really irritates her because he wants to make up some story to make her feel hurt. Ellie remembered that Labrador was also going to some reception today and assumed it might be the one. And when they entered the main hall, She couldn't understand why everyone was staring at them. The young lady saw Hayden at the ball and thought about how she had come to the reception with Lennon and how he might assume she was against him. Then she recalled his words, that she would continue to see him and reveal his secret. The main character understands that Hayden wants to know Lennon's secret, and at the same time, he himself is afraid that she might give him and the secret to Lennon. The young gentleman turns to the girl and suggests that she not slouch in public and stand up straight, as she is here as a partner to the leading contender for the title of Count Hills. He embraces the girl and says that no one has the right to look down on her. Lennon suggests she shouldn't be afraid of their stares. Hearing this, the girl wonders if he thinks she's afraid of others, but she realizes his words have had an effect, and she feels more confident. She believes she has nothing to fear since she hasn't done anything wrong. The aristocrat invited Ellie to look at his heartless brother, who pointedly ignored him. The lady thought that fortunately, he was busy and not paying attention to them, and that he was chatting with someone. Ellie looked at Hayden and couldn't understand why he seemed tense and out of place, so she wondered if maybe he didn't like being around crowds. And then she couldn't understand why he continued to interact with them. The girl ponders the possibility that Hayden is doing this for Togo because he needs to surpass his brother to become the heir. And so he believes this is a struggle for the inheritance. Lennon turns to the young lady and asks if she'd like to go out onto the balcony, believing they've already made their mark on society, and that's enough. At this point, Ellie thought about how confident and superior he was. She figured that if Haiti wasn't here, then Labrador probably wasn't either, and she wondered where he was. Lennon says it's funny and asks if she saw their faces. Then he says everyone tries to choose the more prestigious and wealthy partner to enhance their status, but he thinks they're most concerned with who he came with. The aristocrat asks, who would have thought the Count's heir would choose a commoner as his mate? Then he says he's tired of them all, even among the nobility. They're all the same and all predictable. The young gentleman says that the only thing that makes him feel alive is meeting her. He asks the girl if she has anything she wants to say. Ellie realized she really wanted to speak up at that moment, but the desire to escape this hell was stronger, and she felt her importance when she began to listen to secrets. The protagonist recalls her father's words, telling her she was born to listen. She believes her sister sacrificed herself to save her, and she shouldn't speak otherwise. She understands everything will be lost. She also wants money. Lennon says she's still silent and he's sorry. Then he touches the girl's face and asks if she has another client besides him. He looks at her and says, he's right. The young gentleman says he hopes Ellie can give up this business. Then he explains that she's been told her whole life that she must be useful, otherwise she's useless. Hearing this, the protagonist thought it was true since she had always believed she had to earn love and be useful. He tells her to know that her very existence is valuable, even if she doesn't sacrifice herself for others. Lennon says he trusts her and that she will keep his secret. At this point, the lady doesn't understand how he can trust her and remembers that she's already been offered his secret. The young gentleman said he saw honesty in her eyes, and besides, her eyes were beautiful. She thought it was because he looked into her eyes so often. The guy asks if he can kiss her, then hugs her and touches her lips. He turns to Ellie and asks her to forgive his jealousy, then says he doesn't know if he can ask her that, and wonders who her other clients are. Hearing this, the girl became a little alarmed. He said that if she didn't want to talk, he understood. And in any case, he only asked one thing, that she be his only listener from now on. And if necessary, he would pay her the same as those people. The main character thought that money was the path to freedom, and she really needed it. She touched his palm and showed him that he'd said he'd give her some for personal expenses, and asked when he would give it to her. The young gentleman looked at her and smiled, telling her she was sweet. He asked if his offer was tempting. At that moment, the young lady thought that she wasn't being materialistic, but simply that she really needed the money right now. Lennon agrees and challenges her to guess something. Then he says that if she answers correctly, he'll give her twice what he promised yesterday. He says his bodyguard is at the reception today and suggests she find him among the crowd. He'll only add that this person has been temporarily suspended. The young master explains that he is of course a very faithful servant, but he is young and reckless, and therefore was removed because he did something indecent. Hearing this, Ellie recalls Labrador's words about how he was fired because of his penchant for hands and came to the pub to get drunk and complain about life. And she thought about how maybe he kissed Lennon's hands. Ellie walked out into the hall and thought that she needed to see if there was a Labrador in it. When the main character saw the guy, she looked at him and he at that time looked at her, and the girl thought that he recognized her. The Labrador screaming asks its owner what she's doing there. Lennon sees the guard and asks if he knows Lady Ellie. The young man, seeing His Excellency near the young lady, asks what he is doing there. The young gentleman explains that he is at home. The main character points at the security guard. The aristocrat turns to the girl and asks if this stinking dog is also her client. At this time, she thought about wanting to keep it a secret, but Labrador turned to her first, and more precisely yelled at the whole area, and she does not understand what to do now. The guard turns to the gentleman and asks why he's putting his mistress in such an awkward position. Then he grabs the girl's hand and motions for her to leave. At this point, the young lady looked at the guy, confused as to where he was pulling her so forcefully, but suddenly her body was close to his chest. The guy apologized and then explained that he only meant to gently pull her toward him. The young gentleman asks Labrador if he's forgotten his place. Then he asks what he's doing in his presence. Lennon says that whatever may have happened between them, Lady Ellie has come as his date today. Then he orders him out of his sight. He tells her to remember that it's he who decides whether he returns to duty or not. The young man turns to his hostess and apologizes, then announces that he'll be leaving and they'll meet later. Ellie thought that even though he claimed she was his savior, Lennon was right, and she had to stop sacrificing herself for others. The girl understands that salvation does not fall to the other side and believes that salvation is the work of the one being saved. The young gentleman asks the young lady if this commoner has told her about his love of perversion. At this point, she's at a loss as to what to do as he keeps returning to the topic. Ellie decides she needs to cheat, and she touches his hand and shows that she guessed correctly and therefore offers to pay him double the amount. The aristocrat thought he couldn't leave it like this, and then he announced that he had lost, and he said that every time he spoke to her, he gained confidence that her purity would make him a better man. And in that moment, he forgot that he was the shameless one who kissed his stepmother. Ellie looked at the boy and thought about how he'd once been a good man, and back then, he'd cared about the fate of an ordinary commoner. She realized she couldn't utter a word, but she really wished she could say it out loud. Lennon said they'd made a special appearance today, and he'd walk her home. Hearing this, she thought she wouldn't want the gentleman to run into her father, and she felt that as the eldest heir, he had an obligation to stay longer for the reception. The aristocrat says that he will walk her to the cab, and the girl agrees with him. The protagonist reflected on how she felt like this was all a sweet midsummer's dream, but she realized that dreams are illusions, and reality remains the same. And so she believed she must learn that her reality is nothing like a sweet dream. Lennon asks the girl what she's thinking about. The young lady thinks nothing. He suggests she sit down, as it's time to go home. When Ellie got into the carriage, the gentleman sat down next to her. Seeing this, the girl looked at him with a look that said he couldn't sit next to her and should leave. The young gentleman says that if she has any objections, she should say them out loud. Then he asks if she thought he was obligated to stay at the reception. He explains that this wasn't part of his plan, since right now, he only wants to be with her. The aristocrat says that his mistress and he didn't know that she would be so embarrassed by his words, and asks if he hadn't said before that he was never bored with her. The protagonist, hearing this, doesn't understand why her cheeks suddenly flushed so much. The young gentleman says he doesn't know how she is, but he wants to see her tomorrow. The girl offered him her hand, and he thought she was accepting. Lennon shakes the young lady's hand and tells her he's giving her homework to guess where they're going tomorrow. He asks if she's ever wondered why he chose her as his date. Hearing this, the girl became thoughtful. The aristocrat touched her cheek and said that he had told her this 1,000 times already, that he felt happy with her. And since she hadn't guessed right today, if she guessed right tomorrow, he would see how he could reward her. The young gentleman gives the girl money and says there's enough there to keep her from being sad. Then he calls her his lady. Hearing this, Ellie thought about how he'd never called her that before. He was telling her she should be free and find herself because life is short. The girl doesn't understand how to find herself. She thinks it would be impossible for her, who has always been pushed around by others, to suddenly start living the way she wants. The young lady thought that she would start by managing the money herself. When Ellie entered the house, she heard her mother calling her name. She approached her and saw that her mother was drunk. She recalled that she had always been a drinker, but she wondered when she started drinking. The girl recalls that she started drinking the day her father sold her brother, and her mother always cried because her boy had died. The mother asks her daughter if she knows where her sister is now. Then she tells her that she met Isabella on the street, and she saw her walking with a handsome, richly dressed man. He had golden hair, and she thinks he looks like some kind of nobleman. Hearing this, the main character wondered if Hayden had golden hair, but she believed it was too early to jump to conclusions and needed to find out. Suddenly, the girl heard someone knocking on the door. The guy said it was her faithful dog who had come. The mother woke up and asked her daughter when she got a talking dog. At that moment, little girl realized she was ashamed to admit it, but the dog was actually a person's. Last night, Labrador, sitting on his bed, thought about how his mother is an angel, and he hopes his new owner will be pleased with him. He also thinks his owner is beautiful and has angelic hands. The guy believes he was honest about himself, and even then, she graciously accepted him for who he is. And so he hopes that, thanks to him, she'll smile every day. The Labrador doesn't understand why he keeps imagining his master and mistress together that evening. He hopes it's just an agreement like the one he had with his mistress, but he notices that Lennon likes her. The guy thought about how much he'd love to be her only close friend, so he decided to go to the market tomorrow to buy groceries and cook for her. He thought maybe then she'd realize he was better than Lennon. The Labrador is thinking that if she becomes his owner, the girl will be able to forget about household chores for the rest of her life. The boy thinks that if only he hadn't been so unfortunate as to touch this man's hands, which immediately sparked all sorts of rumors, he would have been bringing home a decent salary. And so he understands that what's done can't be undone, and believes he should think only of his mistress. The Labrador thinks his owner doesn't live alone, and hopes she doesn't have someone else who makes her breakfast early in the morning. And then he knocks on the door, thinking that if it's not his grumpy master, he won't mind. Ellie opens the door and gestures with her finger for silence. At that moment, her mother comes to the door and asks who this beautiful cavalryman is visiting them. The Labrador apologizes for disturbing them, and then explains that he brought them groceries. Mom says he's handsome, and so she won't bother them, the doves. The boy asks in surprise if this woman is her mother, and then realizes he can't look her in the eye. The Labrador asks his owner if she's hungry. Then he says he'll make some food right now. And then he realizes he's still blushing from her mother's words, and so he thinks he should change the subject. The guy says it's good. Her father isn't home, and explains that he was afraid of his awkward questions. Hearing this, the girl thinks he had good reason to be afraid. Luckily for them, he won't be home today. The main character thought about how hungry she was, and couldn't figure out how to get him out now. She pondered what she'd like to eat, what Labrador would cook. The guy says that the beef soup is ready, and then invites the girl to try it. When the young lady took a spoonful, she thought it was so delicious, she even assumed he was a cook, not a knight. And she realized that, although it wasn't exactly what one would normally eat for breakfast, it was very tasty. Ellie reflected that for her eating was just another routine activity to maintain life. But it turns out that eating with someone is pleasant and joyful. The Labrador says he's already asked his father's permission, and therefore believes his arrival wouldn't upset him. He recalls him saying the lady had a meeting with another client today. The girl moves her lips and asks if he's seen her father. He replies that he met his father in that very pub. Hearing this, the main character was surprised, because she thought he was busy with something, but he was in the pub all this time. The Labrador asks his owner if she knows who her client is today. He also wonders if it's his master. At this point, the girl thinks he's guessed right. And of course, it's Lennon. When Ellie saw the guy off, she thought that fortunately, she and the Labrador would not cross paths, and he had already left. Lennon asks the girl if she forgot what she promised. Then he reminds her that he asked her to think about what they would do today, and he can see in her eyes that she has forgotten. The young gentleman informs her that he will occupy all her time today. Then he suggests they get into the carriage. Sitting in the carriage, the girl looked out the window and remembered that her mother had said she had seen Isabella on this street. and she thought that perhaps she would meet her today. Lennon looked at the lady and asked if she was looking for someone, suggesting it might be her lover. He then informed her that if she needed help, she could tell him, as he could do a lot. Hearing this, the main character thought that if she told him, he could help her find her sister, but she believes that she cannot say this, and Patamushto still does not fully trust him, and she assumes that her sister's husband may be in Hayden. The young gentleman says that if she decides to do something, she should tell him, and he won't force her. The young lady thought about how she couldn't understand how she would pay for it later. Ellie looked at the house and realized that it was the estate of the Earl of Hills, and she did not understand how her commoner could be allowed there. Lennon mounts his horse and then tells the girl to give him her hand, and they'll go somewhere together. He explains that when he needs to unwind, he rides a horse. The main character looked surprising, and she doesn't know how to ride it because she has never ridden a horse before. The young gentleman says he'll be driving slowly and therefore advises her not to worry. At that moment, the girl thought she understood him as the wind in her face. The clatter of hooves, the beauty all around, all of it was very pleasant. Ellie realizes she's embarrassed to be sitting so close to him. Then she motions for him to look at the road instead of her. He says he doesn't want to look at the road and says they're driving slowly, so she's safe. The young master says that looking at her face is much more pleasant than looking at the boring courtyard of the estate. At that moment, the main character realized she felt someone's gaze on her, and when she looked at the house, she saw Hayden standing near the window. The girl thought Hayden was looking at them, but realized he was looking at Lennon, and she remembered him talking about someone he was in love with. The servant told Mr. Lennon that his guest had already arrived. Hearing this, the young lady became curious about who had come to see him. The young gentleman helps the girl off her horse and then asks what he should do, since he has an important meeting and the man has arrived early. He offers to talk, and then he will go. Ellie gestures with her finger, indicating she wanted to ask something. He asks what it is. She asks if he has a girlfriend. He replies that he's forgotten how to love. Lennon explains that this is the definition of her condition, an endless abyss of pain, and he's incapable of loving anyone right now. Hearing this, the girl thinks she's experiencing the same thing and believes they're all living in this same hell. The young lady understands that the young gentleman has forgotten how to love, and she who never knew what love was, and Hayden, whose passion is destroying him from within. Lennon touches the girl's hair and says he hopes she can find her way home on her own. Hearing this, she holds up her fingers to see if he'll walk her home. The young gentleman says that he has to go, and that the young lady has to go home. When Ellie entered the house, she heard her father's voice and thought that he had been gone for several days, and now he had decided to show up. The girl overheard a conversation about whether it was possible to prevent bruising after the surgery and preserve her appearance. She wondered what he was talking about. Then a man's voice said he would try to remove them as carefully as possible, but all he needed was a bottle of a special solution which cost money. The stranger asks if there's a way to make her not mine. Hearing this, the girl thinks he wants to blind her. The stranger replies that there's a drug they use to burn out vocal cords. The father asks if it's possible to have the eye surgery performed tomorrow. The man replies that it is. Hearing this, Ellie thought she had to run, and she reflected on how her father had used her to amass a huge sum of money. And so she believed he had become completely unlike himself, and would soon take everything from her except her ears. The main character understands that she will remain his golden antelope, carrying money for the rest of her life. Suddenly, the girl sees Hayden, and he motions for her to be quiet and insists that she needs to leave. Looking at him, she can't understand how he even got there or what he's doing. The young gentleman explains that he came to her because he wanted her to listen to him. The young lady explains that she has nowhere else to go, and therefore thinks it's best for him to leave. Hayden claims he's trying to help her, then asks what's wrong. He asks if she hurt her father and wonders if she's not satisfied. Then he explains that he just doesn't want her to get hurt. The young gentleman offers to listen to him, as he believes she needs to escape. At this moment, the girl looked at him and thought that she couldn't trust him. Ellie recalls Hayden's words about promising to help her escape, but in exchange, she had to meet Lennon and find out his secret for him. And she thought about how Lennon was the first person who had ever been truly kind to her, and therefore she couldn't betray him. The main character believes that even if Hayden really cares about her life, he orders her, and she serves his purposes, and therefore she considers him the same as her father. The young gentleman touches the girl's face and says that she knows better than he what it's like to be used. Then he says that he won't ask anything of her as long as she stays alive. He says he'll return tomorrow, and he hopes she'll come to her senses. At that moment, Ellie thought about what would happen if she ran away right now. All she needed was the wallet with the money Lennon had given her. The father turns to his daughter and asks what she's doing there. Then he says she's just in time and offers to greet his guest. The father tells the stranger they'll see each other tomorrow. Hearing this, the main character thought that tomorrow would be her last day. Her father suggested his daughter go inside because the night was chilly. At that moment, she thought she had no time, and that tomorrow she had to escape this hell. Sitting in her room, the girl thinks about how she can leave while he is sleeping, but her father is not sleeping, and he is sitting and drinking, and so she does not understand what to do. The young lady thinks she'll just wait until he goes to work at the Baron's house, and maybe he'll leave early in the morning. She even thinks there's some relief in that below. It would be better if he left early. Ellie reflects on how she thought she'd never break out of this vicious cycle of obedience, and so she tried to accept it and simply go with the flow. But she realizes that if she doesn't escape, she'll regret it for the rest of her life. The girl believes that this is her last chance, although she, a helpless doll, must challenge the danger. The main character took the money Lennon gave her and the dress he gave her, and she wants to get as far away as possible, and she'll go where her father won't find her. Ellie realizes that her 3 clients might be able to find her, but they want the silent Ellie to be the keeper of their secrets, and so she believes she needs to end this now. Suddenly, the girl fell asleep and dreamed that she was lying on a bed, and a man was standing next to her with a knife in his hand. She realized it was the man who had come yesterday, and she couldn't understand what he was doing near her. The girl realizes he wants to cut out her eyes, and then she screams. Ellie realized she'd been dreaming and sighed with relief. She thought she needed to calm down because she'd cried out and suddenly realized she could speak. The main character realizes there's no time to grieve now, and she must leave. She looks at her watch and realizes he should have left by now, so she should have woken up just in time. At that moment, she remembers that she mustn't forget the money. When the girl came down the stairs, she saw her father sitting at the table eating breakfast and her mother sitting next to him. Seeing them, the daughter was surprised as she couldn't understand why he hadn't left. Her father announced he had decided to quit his job. Hearing this, his daughter thought about how she was his perfect money-making doll and how he was already neglecting his work. And then she thought she couldn't let this happen and had to run away. The father asks his daughter if she's going to the garden. The girl reflects on how often she goes there. The father asks if he can come with her. The man asks the girl if she remembers that she needs to ask his permission before leaving the house. The girl thinks she'll still have a chance, and so she needs to make it before this guy gets here. Ellie is digging a bed near the flowers, and her dad is watching her all the time. And at that time, she thought that if only he would get distracted for a minute. The mother screams and calls her husband to come and see her. He asks what the damned woman wants. She calls him to go faster. At this moment, the main character thought that now was her chance. Then she quickly approached the fence and thought that she had very little time left. The father, crying out, asked where his daughter was going. The girl turned and looked at him, then quickly ran away. Her father, screaming, tells her to stand still. Meanwhile, the girl runs as fast as she can, thinking this is her last chance. And then she remembers her father's words. Could the doctor perform the eye surgery tomorrow? The main character believes it's entirely possible that he'll do it today, and she understands that if her father catches her, she'll have to remain a living doll for the rest of her life, but she doesn't want that. After a while, the girl thought she had no more strength to run, but she heard her father's screams and realized she mustn't let him see her. Ellie ran out into the street and realized she needed to hide. Then she saw an alley and ran there. At this time, the main character was very scared and thought that she really wanted him to leave and not see her. A father approaches his daughter and asks why she makes her elderly father run after her like that. Hearing this, the girl doesn't understand what to do, and her father insists she go home. Suddenly, Ellie saw a woman in a cloak. Then he turned to her and begged her to help her, but said nothing. her father told the girl to go home and not bother passers-by. The main character silently begs for help, but her father insists she go home. Meanwhile, the girl screams, begging for help. The man in the cloak asks the girl if he can help her. Then he turns to the man and asks if he's her father. He replies that he is explaining that his daughter is simply a bit capricious, and that's why he says she didn't interfere. At this time, Ellie looked at the woman and silently begged her not to believe him, because it was not true. The father wants to grab the girl, but the woman removes his hand and says that the young lady does not want this. The man, surprised, asks why she won't let her father bring his own daughter home. He says it's best for her to leave while she's still alive. And then he thinks about some girl counting his names and thinking he won't hit her. The woman lifts her leg and knocks the man to the floor with one kick. Then she turns to the girl and tells her to go. The woman asks if she feels sorry for the old goat. Ellie looked at her father and said goodbye silently. And when she saw the carriage, they approached. She realized this woman was an aristocrat. The stranger says that if she has nowhere to go, she can stay with her. Then she says she can take her wherever she wants. The woman says her father won't leave her. He'll follow her. At this point, the main character thought it was terrible, and she couldn't understand how she could get into a carriage with the first woman she met since she couldn't even see her face. The aristocrat asks if she is afraid to go with her. Then she throws the hood off her head and swears on the honor of her family that she will not harm her. Ellie looked at the girl in surprise, confused as to why she looked the way she did. The stranger said all she had to do was look into her eyes, and she immediately wanted to help her. The woman says that her eyes are beautiful. The girl says that hers are beautiful too. The main character, enchanted by the twin girl, got into the carriage. The aristocrat asks her if she has many problems, and then she says that she can cry because she needs to give vent to her emotions. And then she hugs the girl and says that she will support her. The girl felt the warmth of her hands and wondered if it might be a dream. After 17 years in the hell her father had created for her, she was finally free. The aristocrat says she must tell her it's fate that they met. Then she reveals that for the past few years, she's been searching with all her might for her double. The protagonist is surprised to hear this. The stranger says she was already there, about to give up, as if by fate's will, when they met. Meanwhile, Ellie couldn't stop crying in the carriage and fell asleep. The man asks the girl if she's told her about their situation. She replies that she hasn't yet. Then he asks how she would have done that, since the girl was crying the whole time. He explains that such a story requires a different atmosphere. At this point, the main character is unsure whether she should wake up now, and decides it's best to pretend to be asleep for now. The man asks the lady if she thinks a girl who can't even speak can replace her. The woman suggests he be quieter, as he might wake the girl. At this point, Ellie realizes she can't see them, but she can feel them looking at her. No. And after a few minutes, she decides it's time to wake up. The guy saw the girl getting out of bed and asked if she was awake yet. The woman asks the girl if her name is Ellie. At that moment, she remembers her father's words about her needing to return home because she shouldn't cause trouble for strangers. The stranger apologizes for not introducing herself earlier. Then she says that her name is Hannah Ferv, and the man who is looking at them with a displeased face is her brother, Hardwin. The young gentleman looked at the girl and said that he was pleased to meet her. The lady says they are the children of Count Ferv, and she is the Countess with Hardwin, her assistant. Then she says she wanted to ask something right away. Can she speak normally? The Countess says that she wants to talk about their situation first, and then apologizes for doing so right away, and explains that they have little time. The lady reports that she could die within 2 weeks, and when she's gone, someone must inherit her earldom. She says her parents died young, and she has no other siblings. Therefore, the title must go to Hardwin. The Countess says her brother has no right to inherit due to age restrictions under the law. Inheritance is possible from the age of 18, and he is 17. Hannah says he can only inherit the title next year, but she understands that her time is running out, and therefore the title could go to their cunning cousins who will not miss their chance. The Countess explains why she's been searching for a girl like her for so many years. When I saw her, I thought fate had smiled on her. She says that until Hardwin comes of age, the most suitable person to take her place is Ellie. The Countess sits down next to the girl and says she will give her money, or whatever she asks for, and then she touches her hand. Hannah says that in exchange, she can pretend to be her until Hardwin inherits the Earl's title. Hearing this, Ellie realizes that with the money, she'll be able to start a new life. And she believes that for now, she can hide from her father in this place. Therefore, she thinks this is a very good offer. The Countess says that if she doesn't like her request, she has the right to refuse. Then she says that she needs somewhere to hide from her father. Hannah says that if she pretends to be her, no one will know she's Ellie. At this time, the main character does not understand how she will take her place if she is not able to speak. The Countess says that it is already late, and therefore invites the girl to rest here and think about everything. Ellie thought about how she'd never heard of a ferve before. She thought it was probably because it was so far from her home. The girl realized she had lost the money Lennon had given her, and she didn't understand what she would do if she ever saw her father again. Suddenly, the girl heard someone knocking on the door. Then the guy said it was Hardwin and asked if she was still awake. Ellie opens the door and thinks that he probably forgot to tell her something. The young gentleman asks if he can come in for a while. Then he comes in and sits down. He places a candle on the table and invites the lady to sit down too. The main character looked at him and did not understand what he was doing because she saw white shoes in his hands. Hardwin says he wasn't sure the size was right, so he eyeballed it and went with what he had. Ellie looked at her feet, and she hadn't even noticed that she'd been barefoot the whole time. And she didn't think the man who seemed indifferent would be so attentive. And she thinks he's actually gentle and affectionate. The young gentleman looked at the girl and asked what was wrong, seeing her surprised expression. He then explained that she shouldn't worry, as the shoes were new. The main character put on the shoes and realized that the size fit perfectly. Hardwin apologizes for his sister's ignorance. He then explains that she's a stranger, and it was rude to force her to help them solve their problems. The young gentleman asks the girl what happened to her, that she became like this. At this point, she thinks she wants to answer, but for some reason she can't. The guy looked at the girl and said he understood, since he couldn't have expected anything from her. Then, he suggested she go to bed and announced he was leaving, apologizing for waking her. Hardwin tells the girl to wear these shoes tomorrow. When the young gentleman left the room, the girl saw him smile. And then she thought that if she became Hannah Ferve, she wondered if she would be able to see that smile often. Suddenly, the guy turns to the girl and then comes closer to her, and she understands that if this continues, he will kiss her. However, it all turned out to be a dream. And in this dream, she dreamed of Lennon, who was looking for her. The next morning, sitting at the table, Hannah says that she is deathly ill. Ellie asks if there's any way she can be helped. She replies that unfortunately there isn't, since it's a hereditary condition, and at least it's not noticeable. The young lady explains that she was born with a weak heart. Her father died early from the same condition, so she diligently trained her stamina to prolong her life. Hannah says nothing has changed except her physical condition, and sometimes she couldn't breathe properly because it felt like she was dying right now. The Duchess says her heart is beating very slowly and feels like it will soon stop altogether. Then she turns to him and says she now thinks she understands the whole situation. Hannah asks why she can't speak and wonders if she is mute. At this point, the girl wrote down a reply on a piece of paper saying that she had become accustomed to silence and had therefore forgotten how to speak. After reading this, the mistress asked if she would like to speak now. Ellie nodded her head in agreement. The young lady says that if there's a will, she has no doubt she can learn again. Then she reminds her that she asked her to help them yesterday and asks what she ultimately decided. At this point, the protagonist realized that it wasn't that she wanted to, but she wasn't sure it would work out, since she was used to doing what others told her to do, and she didn't know if she could make her own decisions. The young mistress says she just needs to prove that Hannah Fevre is alive. Hardwin will take care of the rest, and he'll handle it. Then she reminds her that she told her he was her assistant. The Countess says she hopes the young lady will not delay this. At this point, a young gentleman approaches them and addresses the sister, suggesting they stop pressuring the girl. He then asks how it's possible to make such a difficult decision in one day. Hannah asks how many days she should give him. He replies at least 2 days. Hearing this, the Duchess turns to Ellie and explains that he was just making a joke. Then he tells her to laugh, even if it's not funny that she must laugh. Otherwise, he'll be offended. The young lady asks what a man who rarely visits the garden is doing here. Hardwin says she received a letter, and that's why he came to deliver it. Hearing this, Hannah asks if he is really her brother, since he doesn't look like himself, and then offers to give the letter to her. After reading the letter, the Duchess says that a man who is about to die has received an engagement proposal. She looks at Ellie and sees that she seems somewhat thoughtful, and asks if she should tell him who it's from. The young lady reports that the Duke of Hills wrote this to her. At this point, the main character realized that Lennon was the heir to the title of Duke of Hills. Jealous Hayden II, the Duke's son, and Labrador Lennon's knight seemed to connect them in more ways than she had imagined. The girl reflects on how she thought fate would never bring her together with these men again. And she wonders how she should act if she meets them. She also wonders who proposed to Hannah Lennon, or Hayden. The Duchess said it would be a shame if she refused. At this point, the protagonist thought that this was excellent, since Hannah and Hardwin didn't know she knew the Duke. Hannah turns to her brother and asks him to imagine how hard it is for Ellie to think when he looks at her like that. Then she says she knows they're very similar, and so she suggests he refrain from doing that. The young gentleman heard this and told her not to talk nonsense. Then he turned around and left. The Duchess says he sometimes seems rather cold, but he's actually very nice. Then she touches the girl and invites her to come in and talk some more and have a drink while she's at it. Hannah seemed to forget that death was nipping at her heels when she drank. The protagonist watched her discuss only the past, even while drunk, and realized that she knew better than anyone that she had no future. The Duchess turns to Ellie and says that they have been talking so much all day, and it seems to her that they are like two sisters. After a while, the main character smelled something pleasant, and when she opened her eyes, she saw Hardwin trying to cover her with a blanket. The girl thought that she was very grateful to him for his care, and then she did not realize how she pronounced his name syllable by syllable. The surprised guy asks why she just called him by name. Then he suggests she try again. At this point, the young girl wondered if she could repeat that name again. He urged her to be brave. Then he informed her that although she stuttered, she said his name out loud. Ellie was hesitant, but she said his name again. Hearing her speak, the guy threw down the blanket and then said he knew she'd succeed. The young gentleman asks if she's going to bed now. The young lady nods, but he objects, telling her not to nod, but to try answering with words. Ellie looked at the guy and couldn't understand where he was so confident that she could talk, and she wondered why he trusted her without any basis. I think it might be because she looks like Hannah. The main character doesn't know why, but trust gives her the courage to move forward. Hardwin looked at the girl in surprise and asked why she was crying. Then he calmed her down and asked if she was crying because of him or because she was happy. The young gentleman touches the young lady's head and says that she is a good girl and suggests that in future she should not cry anymore, but only smile. The boy lifts his sister onto his shoulders and says he'll carry her. And when the main character is left alone, she thinks about how it's suddenly become quiet, and that's why she feels lonely. The girl still thought she had gotten used to being alone, but after ferv. But suddenly, she saw the door open and the young gentleman wished her good night. Ellie was surprised, because he came back to tell her this, and therefore she thinks he is cute. Lying in a comfortable soft bed, the protagonist thought about Hannah's offer. She reflects on the fact that she hadn't planned to escape, and she believes that her meeting with Hannah, who made her a very good offer, was a coincidence. The young lady understands that the Duchess, unlike her, knew this moment would come, and if the title were to pass to any of the Favor cousins, then Hardwin would be driven out. Ellie thought that she didn't want to see him grieve, and wonder if maybe she should agree. The girl thought that becoming Hannah Favre would be a win-win situation for all three of them. She figured the benefits for Favre were clear, and she'd have the money to run away somewhere, so she decided to agree. The next day, the young gentleman asks if he can come into the room. When the guy walked in, the main character looked at him and couldn't figure out what was wrong. As he looked ill, she was also curious about what was going on and asked what had happened. Hardwin reports that sister can't breathe properly. Then they go to her room. The brother asks the Duchess how she is feeling. She replies that she is in pain. Then he asks if he thought she would never wake up again. At this point, the main character reflected on how the Duchess had seemed more alive yesterday. Then she hugs the girl, reflecting on how, while watching her smile, she hadn't realized it. Ellie realized she now understood that Hannah was afraid of death, and so she wanted to allay Hannah's fear. The girl turns to the Duchess and informs her that she is still alive. Hearing the girl speak, the lady asks in surprise how she could speak. Ellie insists that everything will be fine and says that she agrees. Hearing this, the Duchess says that she is very glad. Then she thanks the girl and says that now she can die in peace. Hannah claims that this is good news and does not understand why she is crying and asking about it. The Duchess hugs her brother and the girl and says that he was right about the 2 days. The young mistress approaches the young lady and offers to try and share something with them. The main character gradually began to tell about herself, that her father took away her sight and voice and tried to make money off of her. Ellie explains that she can't explain in detail because she's not yet used to speaking, but she knows she's been able to share the important facts with the exception of the story about the Duke of Hills. The boy heard this and cried out, asking how such parents could exist in their world. His sister thought it was sheer madness and then said she could punish her father if she wanted. At this time, the main character thought that there was no need to look at her, and she still thought that she was fine. Hannah says that since she agreed, she will tell her more about herself, or more precisely about Countess Fevre. The young lady explains that she rarely went out, and the only thing that ever troubled her was her heart. Not all the nonsense they like to discuss at banquets, and therefore she believes no one will notice the substitution. Hannah announces that this time she must attend the banquet and dance with Hardwin. Hearing this, Hardwin, surprised, asks her sister why. She explains that she can't allow another man to hold Ellie's hand. Then she reminds him that no one must know their secret. The young gentleman turns to the girl and explains that he didn't say that because he doesn't want to dance with her. Hearing this, the sister asks her brother why he's so stupid. Ellie says she can't dance. The Countess says it's okay, and smiles because she thinks she can learn. The young gentleman says he hadn't even thought about it, and says she scared him with her seriousness. At this time, they laughed as if they had forgotten all their sorrows and hardships. But the main character understands that this is not forever, and the happy times will end someday. From that day on, Hannah's condition deteriorated sharply, and she spent the entire time in bed. Ella felt like she was only holding on for her brother's sake. In reality, her heart should have stopped beating by now, but she couldn't die without passing the title to Hardwin. Hannah believed she had to hold out until she found someone like her, and eventually, when she found the protagonist, her strength began to fade. The Countess asks Ellie if she will stay with her for the night, and then suggests sleeping together tonight. The young lady agreed to spend the night with Hannah, and she thought about how she hadn't known what it was like to be close to someone, but she realized she now knew a little about that feeling. Ellie reflects on how, even though they only spent a short time together, Hannah made her realize that interacting with people is really interesting. The Countess asks the girl if she's ever loved someone. She replies that she hasn't. The young lady says she's sorry because she doesn't know what it's like. Then she says she should try falling in love because she thinks it's a wonderful feeling. Hannah says that although she was a sad countess who rarely visited social circles, she dated many guys from a young age, but she understands that sooner or later she would die anyway. The young lady says she didn't want to be pitied, and she was interested in trying many things before leaving this world. And so she hopes that Ellie too will meet someone who will truly love her. Hearing this, the main character doesn't understand how to love this. She believes it's when ordinary everyday life becomes special. It's as if nothing else interests her. Hannah says it's okay that she's new to this feeling. Then she reveals that she thought Hardwin was the only one like that, but it turns out she's the same way. The Countess says that lately all her brother has done is take care of her, but she understands that she will soon die anyway, and therefore wants him to be happy without her. Ellie takes the lady's hand and says he'll be happy. She asks, surprised, why she's so sure. The girl replies that it's because she wants it. Heard this young lady smiled, and then said that it was true since she always said that her brother obeyed her. Hannah asks Ellie if she can ask her to take care of her brother Hardwin one last time. Ellie says of course, and then she thinks about not saying that. The young lady says her brother will cry a lot, and if he does so, while thinking about her, she asks her to wipe his tears. She then says, Hardwin will try to look cool and not show it, but she must tell him that everything is fine. The Countess says that he is stingy with emotions, so it is sometimes difficult to understand him correctly, but she still suggests trying to do this. At this moment, the young girl thought that she was saying goodbye, and then she hugs her and says that she will talk to Hardwin tomorrow. Ellie had a long dream in which they were walking through the garden, holding hands under a clear sky, where Hannah wasn't sick and Hardwin was smiling, and so she believes it was a very happy dream. The protagonist doesn't understand why. If these are just her dreams, she feels strange for any reason. And at that moment, she felt as if Hannah were disappearing forever. And she felt it. When Ellie woke up, she saw Hardwin sitting next to her on the bed. Then she explained that they had met yesterday, but she noticed the expression on his face and looked at Hannah, who was still lying there, still asleep. The girl turns to the Countess, touches her, and asks her to open her eyes. And at that moment, she thinks that her fears will prove unfounded. And with tears in her eyes, she begs her mistress to wake up. Hardwin tells the girl to calm down, then tells her that Hannah has fallen into eternal sleep. He hugs the girl and begins to cry. She comforts him so he won't cry. The protagonist sat in the room the entire time. Hardwin was busy with Hannah's funeral, and she realizes that if she doesn't want to set her up from this day on, she must live as Hannah Favre. Ellie thought about the Countess going to a good place. She realized the funeral was already over, but she didn't know what to do now. Late in the evening, a gentleman came into the room and asked if he could come in. The girl agreed and noticed that his face had become so haggard in just one day. Hardwin asks if they can sleep together tonight and assures her he won't do anything to her. He explains that he's afraid to sleep tonight and therefore believes he definitely won't be able to do it alone. Lying in bed, a guy asks a girl if she's asleep. The young lady replies that she can't sleep. Hardwin says he can still smell his sister in bed, and it feels like she's nearby. He recalls that during the funeral, he wondered why his sister was born with a heart defect while he was perfectly healthy. The guy says he misses her very much. Ellie reassures him and says it's not up to them. He asks why people die over such nonsense. At this time, the girl looked at him and thought that he was alive. And then she touched him and said that the main thing is to remember Hannah with your heart. The young gentleman says he understands everything and therefore believes they should stop crying, because as long as they continue to remember her, Hannah will live in their hearts forever. The next morning, when the protagonist woke up, Hardwin was nowhere to be seen. She also wondered where he had gone and whether she felt it necessary to find him. Ellie came to his room, but before she could open the door, he came out. The young gentleman said he had a place he wanted to go, and then asked if she would join him. When they went outside, Ellie asked when it had gotten so cold, and at that moment, she thought that she needed to grab a coat. Hardwin says that because of his request, she didn't even have time to get dressed, and he doesn't want her to get sick. Then he puts his jacket on the girl. At this point, the main character wonders when he realized she was cold. She reflects on how attentive he is, and how last time he even gave her shoes. When they arrived at the clearing, the main character saw a multitude of flowers. The boy informed her that Hannah was buried there. Hardwin says he and his sister have been growing these flowers since they were children. Then he turns to Ellie and tells her that when she misses her sister, she can come here any time of the day or night, at least occasionally, to remember her. The young gentleman touches the girl's hair and says that she herself said that one must remember one's sister with one's heart. Ellie thanks the guy for showing her this place and suggests they come back together next time. A young girl approaches Hardwin and tells him she has a question. She asks what to do about the maids who saw her. The young master tells her not to worry, as only 2 maids saw her. They both knew Hannah was ill, as they've worked at this mansion for many years. She also shouldn't worry, as they even helped with his funeral. He believes they'll continue to help in the future. The girl thought that this meant that Hardwin trusted them, and they knew that she was a false countess. The guy asks Ellie if she can switch to informal speech, since he thinks they're the same age and she's like a sister to him. Hearing this, the girl is surprised as it came so suddenly. The young gentleman informs her that the Countess should not speak formally to her assistants. The girl smiles and agrees. He suggests she communicate more often, as he believes this will improve her speech. At this time, Ellie thought that until yesterday he looked sad, but today he is smiling and she is happy. The maid reports that a letter has arrived for the Countess. The gentleman looks at the piece of paper and says he wrote it again. The girl asks what it says. Hardwin said it was a letter from the Duke of Hill's hearing. The girl wondered if it meant something about an engagement. When she opened it, she wanted to read it, but couldn't understand what it said. Ellie thought she needed to connect the words that were familiar. Then she read that he would come, because he wanted to hear directly why she had turned down the engagement proposal. At this time, the girl became interested in who exactly proposed to Hannah. She assumes that it was probably Lennon or Hayden. She does not know who exactly the sender is. Hardwin asks Ellie what it says. She says he seems to want to come. And then it occurred to her that Lennon wanted to come in person, and she hadn't even imagined they'd see each other so soon. The girl thought that nothing would happen if they met, but she wondered if he might see Ellie instead of Countess Favre. The young gentleman looked at the girl and saw that she was worried and asked if she had any business with the Duke of Hills. At this time, the main character thought that she tried not to show it, but he apparently noticed. The young gentleman says that if she doesn't want to talk, he won't force her. Then he tells her that she simply needs to remember Tom, Sto, to be different from that Ellie since she's now Countess Favre. Hardwin insists that no one can know the truth. At that moment, she thought he was right, and she had promised Hannah. The young gentleman understands that, although they've spent little time together, she doesn't want to break her promise, and he believes that now she's Hannah Favre, and no one will be able to catch her. The young gentleman asks her what she thinks she should do first. She thinks she should first learn the basics of etiquette. Hardwin insists that she needs to practice her speech first. She agrees and asks when they can start. A week later, the protagonist practiced with Hardwin for 6 days. They talked non-stop, and her speech became clearer and more confident. Besides practicing speaking, she also learned the basic etiquette necessary for a nobleman. After that day, she never saw Hardwin cry, but catching his smile was also difficult. The girl wondered if the young gentleman would ever return to normal. She thought that talking about Hannah might cheer him up. Ellie asks the guy if he's ever been in love. She remembers Hannah saying he's never been in love before. Hearing this, the guy says she's told him too much about him. Then he admits it's true because he simply wasn't interested. Hardwin asks the girl if she's ever been in love. She replies that she's never been in love because she's never had the opportunity to love anyone. The young gentleman announced that the Duke of Hills would be arriving soon and asked if she could handle it. The girl replied that everything was fine, and then she thought about how she'd hoped Lennon wouldn't show up. But he did. The young lady reflects on the fact that no one can stop the Duke, and when she looked out the window, she saw him. Suddenly, Ellie realized she was with Lennon. Their eyes locked, and she didn't know what to do. Then she decided she needed to calm down because she wasn't the Ellie he knew. The young lady remembered Hardwin saying he'd meet Lennon, and so she figured all she could do was wait. However, she was starting to get nervous because Lennon was still there and her throat was dry. Ellie opened the door and wanted to take a look, but remembers that Hardwin told her to keep her head down. And when she went out into the hallway, she wondered where the maids had disappeared to. So she decided it was dangerous to go to the dining room and decided to go back to her room. Suddenly, Ellie heard a familiar voice and Lennon addressing her and calling her Ellie. And then he grabbed her hand and looked at her. At this point, the main character thought that if she didn't answer normally, now he would find out she was Ellie, and she believed she could handle it. The girl abruptly takes her hand away and then assures him he's mistaken. And at that moment, he thinks she's no longer the same mute Ellie. The young lady reflects that it's a bit inspiring that Lennon, who maintained an impassive expression, even when her secret was revealed, now looks at her like that, and therefore she believes she needs to move in that direction, since she's now the Countess of Favre. The young lady asks if he is Lennon, who was supposed to visit them today. Then she apologizes for not introducing herself. Suddenly, the girl heard someone ask her why she had gone out. Hardwin says he told her to wait for him until he arrived. Hearing this, the main character apologizes. Mr. Favre turns to Lennon and informs him that he ended their conversation a little abruptly. The Duke apologizes and explains that she simply reminded him of someone. The main character says that she is Hannah Favre and asks for permission to take her leave. Hearing this, the Duke grabs the girl's hand and asks her to wait, as he has come to see her. He then informs her that he has been told that due to her poor health, Hardwin will be seeing her. Lennon says it's a coincidence that they ended up meeting and thinks it's definitely fate. Then he asks if she'd like to have tea with him. At this time, the girl thought that she would really like to refuse, but she believes that if she now avoids Lennon, he will become even more persistent in seeking their meeting. Ellie says she agrees. If it doesn't take too long, sitting at the table together, the protagonist doesn't understand whether the Duke will constantly stare at her. and so she believes she needs to focus on completely dispelling Lennon's suspicions. The girl believes that she should behave like a noblewoman, not a commoner. The gentleman apologizes for not introducing himself, and then reveals that he is the Duke of Lennon Hills. Ellie said it was nice to meet him, and then she thought about how, as expected from a nobleman, this atmosphere was radically different from hers. It seemed strange to her, as if he was trying to catch her in a lie. The main character thought that it was as if he was telling her that no matter how hard she tried to look like an aristocrat, in the end, she was just an ordinary commoner. Ellie. Hardwin turns to the gentleman and reminds him that, as he's already mentioned, his sister has severe bronchial problems. Therefore, she can't talk much, and he hopes he'll understand. Lennon assures her that, of course, they won't talk much. Then he says they can continue the conversation after the Countess recovers, asking if he can help her with that. The Duke asks for permission to visit her more often. After the gentleman left, the protagonist thought about how it felt like a hurricane had passed. Then she asked the guy if he was in a bad mood because she thought he was angry with her for not waiting for him in the room. Hardwin says it's swollen. The girl doesn't understand what he's talking about and asks about it. He explains that her wrist is swollen. She looks at her hand and says that it is indeed swollen. The young gentleman tells her he really doesn't like Lennon Hills. Then he asks why he grabbed her hand so tightly. The guy takes the first aid kit, then applies a bandage to his arm, saying it will help reduce the swelling. He offers to support him a little. Hardwin insists that the next time someone tries to grab her wrist, she should tell them that holding a woman's wrist without permission is very rude. Then he asks if she'll be sure to say that. The girl heard this and smiled, but he insisted that she shouldn't laugh, since he was speaking seriously, and asked her to repeat it. Elle says it's impolite to grab a woman's wrist without permission. The guy asks if he can pet her. The girl nods again and thinks about how it's starting to feel weird to nod in response to a question. The protagonist recalls that just a few months ago, she had no motivation to live. She didn't want to eat or do anything, and so she believes she simply existed, while her life has completely changed since she came to Countess Favre. The young lady reflects on how she wanted to speak and how she wanted to repay Hannah for saving her. She also wanted Hardwin to be happy, and that's why she only now feels alive. Ellie thanked the guy and thought that she was grateful to him for taking care of her swollen wrist and for making her feel alive. The guy looked at the girl and said that she was smiling so brightly, and then he left. She asked why he was leaving, and he replied that she needed to rest. When the young lady was left alone, she thought that the young master felt burdened by her gratitude. The next day, when they came to the flower meadow again, the young lady said that if she thought about it, there was still a lot she didn't know about him. Hardwin asks her what she's interested in, and then gives her his jacket so she won't get cold. The girl asks when his birthday is. He replies that he was born in November on the first snowy day. Ellie says it suits him. He asks, surprised, "What exactly?" She explains that his hair looks like snow. The young gentleman asks when the girl was born. She replies, "In March on the last snowy day." Hardwin says her hair also resembles snow. She claims they were born on the first and last snow days. She asks when it will snow this year. He says he doesn't know, but he and his sister usually watch the first snowflakes together. The girl asks if she can take on this role this year. He replies that, if she doesn't mind, he'd be happy to. Unfortunately, the quiet days did not last long, because the next day, Lennon dropped by again for a visit. Seeing him, the main character asks why he came. Then he claims he can't help her with her illness. The young gentleman asks why she thinks so, and then informs her that he has brought good tea from the West. The young lady thanked him for his kindness, and then she realized she still couldn't breathe to keep talking. Lennon says he thinks it's still hard for her to talk. She replies that it's okay, but he might not come as often. And then she thinks she'd like him to shift his attention away from Countess Favre. Hannah says she's leaving. Hearing this, he grabs her hand and tells her to wait. She screams and says it's impolite to grab a woman's wrist without permission. Then he takes his hand back. Lennon apologizes and explains that he didn't want to leave her so soon, and asks if she would give him a little more time. The young lady agrees and offers to continue their conversation. He thanks her for agreeing to talk to him. The maid informs her that she's made them tea again. At this point, the protagonist notices that she's smiling much more than usual. Therefore, she decides she shouldn't dwell on it. The young woman turned to the guest and asked him to explain why he'd decided to propose. It occurred to her that he'd already benefited from Ellie's disappearance and didn't understand what else he needed. Lennon recounts something that happened in his childhood. He explains that his younger brother had an assistant his own age, and whenever they saw each other, they'd discuss something. They were about the same age, so they had plenty of things to talk about. However, one day his brother's jewelry went missing, and he was so angry that he immediately raised a fuss. Naturally, an assistant was blamed for the theft. But Lennon is certain it was some kind of misunderstanding. Hearing this, the main character does not understand why he is suddenly telling her this. The young master reports that he was afraid to side with the servant because he was young and didn't want to upset his father. The girl asks what he did. Lennon replies that he kept quiet, even though he felt terrible. A few days later, he decided to help the servant, but it was too late. His brother Hayden had finished him off. The Duke says his brother has become a cruel man ever since. Hearing this, the girl recalls how she thought death was a normal occurrence for him and believes he became that way after that incident. Lennon says he felt guilty at the time, but it bothered him for a long time as he believes he should have stood up for him earlier. Then he met a girl named Ellie. The young gentleman says she was a commoner who couldn't speak properly. The girl's father saw her only as a tool for making money, and then he explained the situation to her and how best to handle it. The guy says he was very happy when she could rely on him, until at some point she ran away. Lennon says he generally has a hard time being kind to others, and the reason he proposed was because they were similar. Hearing this, the young lady asks if he means to say that he proposed to her because she resembles her. He replies that this is the honest truth and asks if it would be offensive for the Countess to hear this. The young lady says he was right, because she's offended. Lennon apologizes and says he won't bother her anymore from tomorrow. Hearing this, the main character does not understand why he changed his mind so abruptly. The young gentleman explains that this is his way of showing her his sincerity and nothing more. He then thanks her for listening to him and announces that he's leaving. After the Duke left, Hardwin enters the ladies' room and asks if the conversation went well. Then he asks what happened. The young lady smiled back and said that everything was fine since he wouldn't be coming anymore. Hearing this, the young gentleman said that it was strange for him, but he was glad. Ellie saw Lennon talking to the maid and thought about how he was the kind of person who got along well with people, and she understood that he would do anything to find out who she was. The protagonist realizes that the maid who knows her secret has apparently fallen in love with Lennon. She also suspects that Lennon may have seduced the maid. Ellie tells Hardin she has a bad feeling about this. He reassures her and tells her not to worry. He then tells her he's listening to her and assures her he'll never harm her. The young lady reports that she believes Lennon is trying to seduce the maid, and it's the maid who knows she's not Hannah. The young gentleman, hearing this, said he thought she could be relied upon. Then he asked if he could send her away for a while and send her to another province for a year, giving her enough money to live on and providing her with a place to sleep. Ellie says Lennon will understand because she thinks he has enough power and money. Then she turns to him and says she can handle it herself because she thinks that's what Hannah would do. Hardwin says he has a strange feeling. She asks if it's bad. The young gentleman replies that on the contrary, he feels like she reminded him of Hannah's good qualities because she's not trying to run away and wants to handle things on her own. A young woman asks if she looks like her sister. The guy doesn't understand what she's talking about and claims it has nothing to do with it. Then he tells her she looks nothing like his sister. The protagonist apologizes and says she won't talk like that again. He asks surprised what she's talking about. He insists that he sees her in her not Hannah. Hearing this, the girl asks him in surprise, why? Because she thinks they're not alike. He says they are. But that's all. The young gentleman turns to the lady and says that she has been Ellie to him from the very beginning. When the girl was alone in her room, a maid was cleaning her room. The maid said she'd pour her some hot tea. Hearing this, the girl thought about how she'd told Madeline her name, and then thanked her. The young lady asks the maid if she's having a hard time. She replies that everything is fine and thanks her for her concern. At this point, the protagonist thinks about what Hannah would do. The girl believes she has two plans. The first of which is to establish a connection with Madeline. She doesn't think Madeline would easily reveal her secret to Lennon. She believes everything could change, and therefore she believes she needs to win her over to her side. The second plan is to confront Lennon face to face, so we'll meet with him and convince him she's not Ellie. She understands it's very risky, but she believes she has to be the perfect Hannah. The main character doesn't understand why Lennon is looking for her. She wonders if he's discovered her and if he'll admit his true intentions. Ellie was lost in her thoughts when she suddenly heard a knock on the door and asked who was there. Hardwin said it was him and asked if he could come in. Ellie agreed. The young gentleman says he's just worried and thinks things won't be easy with Lennon. Hearing this, the protagonist thinks that even though she said she could handle everything, he still continues to worry about her. The young lady says she wants to befriend Madeline because she believes the more they communicate, the less likely she is to tell Lennon about their secret. Hearing this, the boy says she has a good idea. Then she explains that when Madeline was still a child, she was almost sold to a brothel. But Hannah saved her, and as a countess, she cared for her like an older sister. Soon, Madeline, unkempt and untidy, gained a little weight and finally began to smile brightly. And so she became faithful to Hannah. Hearing this, the girl now understands why Hardwin believes Madeline and thinks that she feels trustworthy. Just when you think no one can help you, when you feel the darkness consuming you, you suddenly see someone's hand reaching out to you like a ray of light, and it feels like a momentary blessing. Hardwin says he's not sure he can trust Madeline, but he thinks it would be helpful to befriend her. She sees him getting sleepy and asks if he's getting any sleep. He replies that he's sleepy. Ellie asks if he wants to sleep with her. The young gentleman, surprised, asks what she's talking about. The young lady asks, "What's wrong with that?" Then she says they slept together last time, and she says she didn't mind him sleeping with her. The guy says he'll stay. Lying in bed, the protagonist reflected on Madeleine's difficult childhood and recalled that she and her sister had been in a similar situation. Ellie turns to the guy and says she has a favor to ask. She realizes it's a bit presumptuous, but she doesn't even know if she can forgive him for something like that. He asks what she wants and suggests they talk. A young lady asks if they can find her sister. The girl says she thinks her father sold her sister into marriage. Hearing this, the guy was surprised and asked if it was true that her father had sold her sister. She replied that it was true, and then said that if he kept making such a face, wrinkles would definitely appear. Hardwin says he doesn't want to discuss it anymore, and is glad she didn't get to them too late. Ellie agreed with him, and at that moment, she thought that she too considered herself lucky to be in this place, and she was very glad to have met him and his sister. The young gentleman offers to tell her anything that can help him find her sisters. The young lady reports that Isabel is here now, along with a young man in fine clothes. The guy says that he will definitely find her sister, and therefore allow her to live in this mansion. Ellie happily asks how she can repay him for his help with this matter. He replies that he doesn't need anything. Then he says that if she truly wants to thank him, she should tell him about her relationship with Lennon. The main character says that, as she mentioned earlier, she had to work with Lennon because of her father. Then she says she can't reveal the details because it's a secret. The girl believes that Lennon is looking for her, fearing that his secret will become known. Hardwin says he thought the Duke was looking for her because he liked her and knows that's not true. Ellie claims that Lennon doesn't love her and believes it's more like sympathy and curiosity. The young lady says the Duke didn't treat her like a commoner. He was always tactful and wanted her to speak to him. The girl thought that even if she confessed to him who she was, he might even help her. And so she believed that perhaps she had been unfounded in her fears. Ellie asks the guy why she doesn't tell Lennon who she is. He insists it's impossible because he doesn't know whether he's a good person or a bad one, but he thinks the fewer people who know the truth, the better. The young lady agrees with him. He smiles and says that she is obedient to him. The girl says that it is because she listens to him. Suddenly, the guy says he's leaving. Ellie Udavlano asks what's wrong and wonders what she did wrong. Hardwin explains that's not the issue. Then he announces that there will soon be a banquet at the Imperial Palace. The young gentleman informs her that she must practice dancing with him starting tomorrow. He explains that he completely forgot to tell her about this. Then he leaves and bids her good night. The young woman lay down on the bed and thought about how he had already left, but the bed was still warm. She would like to fall asleep here tonight. The next morning, Madeline says she hasn't said this before, but she is very glad that Lady came here. The maid believes that this way she can at least somehow thank the Countess, since she has done a lot for her. A week has passed since the main character decided to befriend Madeline, And during this time, she has already learned a little more about her. Madeline came to the Countess's house at the age of 5, and she will turn 15 this year. And this girl lived in this house for 10 years. The more Ellie looked at Madeline, the more familiar she seemed. She reminded her of her sister, whom her father had given away somewhere, and who remembered it happening 10 years ago. When the main character asked Madeline to recall her childhood, she said she couldn't remember anything. This was probably because she was shocked that they wanted to sell her. Ellie thanked the maid for keeping her secret. Then she said she believed her. The maid says she'll help her until the day Hardwin receives the title of Count. Then she asks if she's free today, asking permission to go into town as she needs to attend to personal matters. Madeline leaves and tells them not to worry as she will be back soon. Ellie doesn't understand what kind of personal matters a maid could have, and then asks if she can take her with her. The maid asks if she'll be okay. The mistress replies that she will be fine, as she believes it won't be for long. Sitting in the carriage, the protagonist reflected on how this was her first ride since moving in with the Countess. She also wondered if everything would be okay without Hardwin. Madeline went outside, and then the lady said that they would see each other and ran off somewhere. At this point, Ellie realized that she was more worried about Lennon than Madeleine, who hadn't arrived for a whole week. She didn't think he was the kind of person who would stand silently by. The protagonist believes she needs to find out what Madeleine's personal affairs are, so she decides to follow her. As she walked down the street, the girl thought it reminded her of how she had run away from her father. She wondered if he was still looking for her. Ellie thought she needed to stop thinking about this. But suddenly, she collided with a man, and her hat almost fell off. But the man grabbed it just in time. The girl saw Lennon. He turned to her and told her she needed to be more careful. Then he asked if she was there on business. The young gentleman says it's dangerous to travel alone without maids and knights. She replies that she was just about to return, and then he thinks she needs to go get something slow. When the main character looked outside, she saw that the maid was no longer there. Lennon says they met by chance and asks why she sighs so much. The lady asks the gentleman what his business is here on. The Duke says he wants to find someone, and if she doesn't mind, he'll walk her to her carriage. It occurs to her that since Madeline has disappeared into the crowd, she should at least keep an eye on Lennon. Then she agrees. Ellie asks the gentleman if he had a meeting planned. He replies no, and Ellie wonders what that means. He wasn't planning on meeting Madeline. The young lady asks who he was looking for. If it's not a secret, he replies that if she's interested, he'll tell her. The Duke asks if she remembers their last conversation when he said that he was looking for a girl like her. Ellie replies that she remembers Lennon says he's trying to find her because he really wants to meet her, and he spent all his search and a lot of money on her. And finally, he found an eyewitness to the girl he's looking for with silver hair. The young gentleman reports that, about a month ago, an eyewitness saw 2 silver-haired women getting into a carriage. Furthermore, on the very day he saw them, the girl he was looking for disappeared. Lennon says he understands, so there aren't many options here. The young lady asks what conclusion he's reached. The Duke replied that one of the 2 women was the one he needed. After that, he began searching for the carriage they had left in. He questioned every coachman in the capital. Then he asked if the lady would be interested in hearing the results. The young gentleman says that if so, then he will tell her the next time they meet. The protagonist claims she's not interested. He says who knows, maybe they'll meet again. Hearing this, the girl doesn't understand why he's so obsessed with her. Ellie asks him to let her ask her one more question. She asks why he's looking for her. She also wonders if it's because she suddenly disappeared or because he likes her. Lennon replies that it's more like he feels like he's lost something. He then explains that he's not a very good person and he has terrible desires. And every time he commits a reckless act to satisfy his desires, he suddenly becomes empty. The Duke says that after meeting a girl named Ellie, this emptiness disappeared. He recalls that she even consoled him, which is why he enjoyed being around her. The young gentleman says he wants to find her and do something for her. And he believes he hasn't even decided yet whether he feels friendship, affection, or perhaps love for her. Lennon says the first thing he wants to know is if she's safe, and he wants to talk to her again. The young lady asks if he misses that girl. The gentleman replies that he does. Hearing this, the main character realized that she hadn't even known she was important to him. However, she suspects he's not genuinely missing her. Ellie says she hopes he finds this girl. Then she takes his hand. The Countess asks him to consider why she decided to suddenly disappear. Then she says that if he misses her, it means she's valuable to him. And then she thinks he shouldn't complicate things by searching for her. And then she announces that she's already leaving. Lennon approaches Hannah and says he wants to meet her. She says she'll talk to Hardwin about it. Suddenly, the main character heard a familiar voice. The Labrador asked where she had disappeared to so suddenly, and whether he knew how long he had been searching for her. Seeing him, the girl does not understand what he is doing here and thinks that she needs to leave before he notices. But suddenly the girl's hat falls off. The guy looks at her in surprise and asks if she's the owner. Then he stands next to her and examines her from all sides. The young lady says that this is rude and asks him to move away. Hearing this, the guy asks in surprise if she is talking. Ellie asks what he's doing. The Labrador kneels down, and then she thought about how he'd been suspended and maybe brought back into the service, and she couldn't even imagine that they could be together. And then the Lady Posmatrella looked at the Duke and thought that it would be better if he stopped looking like that and helped her. The knight asks his mistress where she's been all this time. He also wonders why she pretends not to know him, and asks what he did wrong. The Labrador suggests telling him, as he'll definitely improve. He also asks her not to ignore him, and begs her not to abandon him. At this point, the main character thought this was even worse than when she first met Lennon. But she realized she couldn't hide her identity from the Labrador, as she believed he remembered his owner's scent. Ellie turns to the guy and tells him it's a secret, and it's not nice to cry in front of a woman he's never seen before. She therefore thinks he must be confused, because she looks so much like someone he knows. The lady says that she is not the hostess, but Hannah Fevre, and says that if he stops crying, she will forgive him for his behavior. Lennon says he feels the knight was very rude and therefore asks for forgiveness. The lady says it's okay and says she has to go. Sitting in the carriage, the protagonist ponders whether she did the right thing. Although she didn't say it was her, she believes her actions effectively confirmed her identity as Ellie. The girl doesn't understand how she could have ignored his desperate voice, and so she simply hopes she did everything right. When Ellie returned to the mansion, she lay down on the sofa. Lost in her thoughts, she didn't even notice Hardwin approaching her to tuck her in. The young gentleman apologizes because he didn't mean to wake her. The young lady says it's okay, and then asks why he came so late. The guy says he wanted to ask her what color she likes. She replies, purple. Hearing this, he sighs with relief and says he's happy. The girl asks why he's happy. Hardwin says there's a banquet in 2 days, and her dresses. But suddenly, a maid enters the room and announces that a man has come to see the Countess. He calls the lady mistress. Madeline reports that he said the Countess should meet him. Then she asks her mistress what she will do. Hearing this, the main character thought about something she hadn't even imagined he'd think of. Then she told the maid to show the man to the living room and tell him she'd be there soon. Hearing this, Hardwin was surprised, and then turning to Ellie, he said that they call her the mistress, and therefore ask if she has any strange hobbies. They also ask if she has raised anyone. The young lady claims she didn't raise him, and most likely believes he's a foundling. He was one of her clients, and she accidentally ran into him today while out in town. Hearing this, the young gentleman asks in surprise if she's been to town. The girl says she had to, and then apologizes. She says she'll take responsibility for it and explains that he's different from Lennon. Hardwin says he understands her, and then asks why he calls her mistress. The girl suggests going to the living room first, then informs her that this information is confidential. And at that moment, she thinks that Hardwin isn't disappointed that she didn't answer the question and thinks he might turn his back on her. The young gentleman touches the girl's hair and tells her not to worry, as he is not disappointed. He thinks she's said enough. Ellie explains that if anything happened, he would quickly reveal her identity. When the girl came to the knight, he looked at her in surprise. Hardwin said he wasn't a dog and asked why he still had an owner. The girl said maybe he really was a dog and told the Labrador to sit down. The young gentleman announces that he is Hardwin Fevre, still protects Ellie. The knight says his name is Labrador Lassens, and since he's the Duke of Hills's knight, Ellie is considered his mistress. Hearing this, the main character thought that he was talking as if she was part of the Duke's family. Hardwin says they can't share all the details, but Ellie is now replacing his sister Hannah. The Labrador says he understands a Mulladoy. The gentleman asks if he plans to tell anyone about this, and even if he does have such thoughts, he suggests he answer them honestly anyway. The knight kneels and tells the girl she doesn't have to answer to him, and he won't ask why she became Hannah. Then he shows her the ring and offers to let him be by her side. The Labrador says he's willing to swear on his late mother's belongings that he'll never betray her. Then he says that before his mistress, everyone thought he was weird, but he knows how amazing she is. The knight asks why he would betray her, since he believes he will never meet someone like her again. At this point, the protagonist thinks she doesn't know whether the Labrador loves her or her hands, but she is certain of one thing: he will never betray her. The girl turns to Hardwin and says everything is fine. He says he can't completely trust him because Sir Labrador, the Duke of Hills, knight means he's somehow connected to Lennon. The knight says he spoke correctly since he serves him. The young master says he might have noticed his servant's presence there, and he might eventually reveal their secret. The Labrador suggests not to worry about it, because when he met his owner that day, Lennon was there too, and he knows he really likes his owner. The knight says that while the mistress assured him she wasn't, Ellie Lennon looked at them suspiciously. He then asks if they know how he can be possessed, and therefore he believes he won't stop trying to find them. Labrador says he's sure Lennon would have thought it strange if he hadn't come here today. Hearing this, the main character wondered if he was a stupid dog, and she realized she'd almost said it out loud. The guy says that since it's related to her, he's thought it all through very carefully. The young gentleman insists he's still not ready to trust him completely. However, if he does something for him, at least he'll try. And then he says he should keep an eye on Lennon Hills. Hardwin says he must report back to them. As far as the Duke knows, it's Ellie. He must also report back if he starts following her himself. At this time, the girl thought that it was not entirely beneficial for the knight to keep an eye on his duke. The Labrador agreed and asked when he should start. The girl thought he was clearly an exception, and the young gentleman asks where his knightly pride has gone. Labrador says he cannot serve two people at once, and the man to whom he has already sworn allegiance. And then he touches the lady's feet and says it is she, Miss Ellie. The boy says he can't fulfill his knightly duties by betraying her. Then he declares that he's all hers. Labrador says he wasn't attached to Lennon from the start and simply wanted to observe him up close. The knight announces that he also has a favor to ask of Hardwin. He then says that if he succeeds in his task, he would please appoint him as the Countess's personal knight, as he believes he is ideally suited for the position. Hearing this, the main character says everything is fine, as she believes the Labrador won't bite her. At that moment, she thought that the most he'd give her was a kiss. Then she says it's late and he should go back. She suggests they meet in a week. Hardwin suggests keeping an eye on Lennon, and then they'll know whether they can trust him or not. Ellie stroked the boy's hair. Mr. Ferv said it was late and he should go back. At that moment, the girl thought Hardwin was very angry, probably because she had not only left without asking, but also told the Labrador who she really was. And to top it all off, she stroked his head. Ellie turns to the young gentleman and insists she will never act alone again. She then explains that she was forced to go outside because of Togo, to Onachotella follow Madeleine. The girl says that she eventually met Lennon, who also promised to tell her about Ellie the next time they met. Hardwin challenges Ellie to answer his question precisely. He asks if he's still her guardian. She replies, "Of course." The guy says that he will tell her it is as a guardian and asks that she be careful. The lady asks if he's talking to Labrador, and he literally swore allegiance to her. He says he's not asking her to trust him completely, but the girl asks if it's okay to trust him at least a little. The young gentleman takes the girl by the hand, then throws her onto the bed and lies on top of her. He asks how much she trusts him, and then asks if she knows what he's thinking about. At this point, the protagonist thought about how she trusted Hardwin more than anyone else. However, she couldn't imagine what he was thinking right now. The guy says no one knows what's on someone's mind. Then he suggests not trusting people. He sits down by the bed and apologizes because he thinks he overdid it. The young master swears he'll never do that again. Then he tells Ellie to be careful around people because he believes not all people are good. Suddenly, the main character touches the guy and asks what's wrong with him. She says she's been able to talk to him again, and he gave her some shoes. She wonders if he's a good person. Hardwin was surprised by the question, then said he'd scared her 3 minutes ago. The girl said she didn't know anything because he was nice, and that's why she wasn't scared. Ellie insists that she understood so clearly what he wanted to convey to her. Then she touches his hand and says, "Everything is fine." Lady asks if he's ever been burned by trusting someone. The gentleman recalls that when their father died, they acquired an uncle who was very kind to them, but in reality, he simply wanted the title of Count. He trusted him, except for his sister, and could confide in him alone. Ellie says she too believed her father, and couldn't even imagine that he wanted to take away her voice and sight, and so she understands his feelings. The girl approaches the guy and invites him to sit closer to her because she wants to hug him. She hugs the guy and asks him to trust her. Then she tells him that she wants him to reciprocate her trust. At this time, the main character became interested in how much time it would take for them to be able to completely trust each other. The next day, Ellie looked at the boy and asked how long he would stand like that. Then she suggested he sit down. Hardwin apologizes for yesterday and explains that he's been thinking about it all morning. The girl tells him to forget it since she's fine. Then she asks if he came for a reason. The young gentleman explains that they rehearsed a dance yesterday for tomorrow's banquet. Hearing this, the protagonist wonders if it could even be called a dance, as she kept stepping on Hardwin's feet. Mr. Ferv announces that they need a dress rehearsal and says that he has also prepared a dress for her for tomorrow, and therefore suggests that she change into it and go out. The girl agrees. When the main character in the dress section looked at herself in the mirror and thought how beautiful she was, she thought that if Hannah were alive, this dress would have been meant for her, and she thinks she would look so beautiful in it. Ellie thought that for her sake, she had to play her role perfectly. Hardwin's office door and asked if she could come in. When she saw the guy, she was very surprised as he was dressed nicely. The young gentleman asks if she's arrived yet. And by that point, the girl hasn't even noticed how much she's become engrossed. Then he asks her how she turns around and asks if she looks like Hannah. Hardwin insists she looks like herself, but she thinks people who don't know her will think she's Hannah. Then she says the dress suits her. Ellie asks if he chose it himself. He replies yes. At that moment, she remembers that he asked her what color she liked, and now she understands why he felt relieved then. The young lady thanks the guy and insists she likes the dress. He says this is good news for him and suggests they start rehearsing the dance. The young gentleman asks if she remembers, then informs her that he will lead the way, and she will simply need to follow. So he suggests that she relax and concentrate. At this point, the main character was thinking that she felt a little strange since she was doing better today. Then suddenly, she stepped on his foot again. She asked if they could rest for a bit. Ellie thought about how his fingers on her back were bothering her, and that it was making it difficult for her to concentrate on the dance. The girl doesn't understand why she feels so excited. Around this time, Lennon had a dream about meeting Ellie, but it was very dark, and he didn't know where he was. When he woke up, he realized that since it had started, he'd been thinking about her constantly. Lennon enjoyed casual relationships because true feelings require responsibility, which he found burdensome. His inner possessiveness insisted he should have everything he wanted. With his perfect looks, talent, and family wealth, this wasn't a difficult goal for Lennon. However, he faced a problem the moment Ellie entered his life. And then, for the first time in a long time, Lennon's heart began to beat faster. The servant informs the master that everything was as he thought, and Sir Labrador went to see Countess Fevre. He asks if he knows what they talked about. The servant replies that they talked inside, and therefore, unfortunately, he knows nothing. At this point, the young gentleman was thinking about Hannah, who rarely shows her face in social circles, and so all sorts of rumors circulate about her. They say she's ugly, and the people who invent these rumors are far worse than those they gossip about. He hadn't originally intended to get married, but the proposals kept coming, so Lennon would prefer to marry someone whose vision of marriage matched his. He wanted to marry a girl who wouldn't love him, and he considered Hannah Fevre just the right woman. The young gentleman realized she resembled Ellie, and so he decided proposing to her would be a good idea. He realized she hadn't given any reason for her refusal, but at the time, he was frustrated because he couldn't find Ellie. Hills decided to go to the Countess and personally ask her why she had rejected the offer. Mr. Fevre said it was because she was ill, and he went in her place. He said sister suffered from bronchial asthma and wouldn't be suitable to be his wife. and since she still couldn't speak properly, he went in her place. The young gentleman said he hoped he would understand. And as he was leaving, he thought it wouldn't work out, and he was sorry because he had found her a very interesting person. Lennon thought he'd never forget that moment. A foot frozen mid-step, a head slightly bowed, and a beautiful appearance complete with waist-length silver hair. He remembers that this girl looked just like Ellie, and when the young gentleman came closer to the lady and called her Ellie, she assured him that he was mistaken. And when her brother asked Hannah why she had gone out, he was once again convinced that she was Countess Favor, and he thought he was mistaken since unlike Ellie, she could speak. But he still wondered how they could be so similar. From that day on, Lennon began investigating how Ellie and Hannah might be connected. After scouring the capital, he discovered stories of two silver-haired women getting into a carriage together. A woman entered the gentleman's office and asked what was wrong and why he hadn't come to see her. He wondered what brought his mother to him. The lady says that she hasn't seen him at all lately, and that's why she's very upset about it. The guy doesn't understand what she's talking about and asks about it, then explains that he was just busy. She asks if he has a new woman and also wonders how long he'll last this time. A week and 2 weeks. The Duke says he doesn't know and is wondering how things will turn out. The lady says he shouldn't hurt her too much, and if he continues like this, it will hurt him one day. The guy claims he'll never be in pain, and he believes he knows how to live pain-free better than anyone. Then he announces he'll be leaving early today. Walking down the corridor, the Duke thought that earlier he would have been angry with this woman, but now he had no time for that. Suddenly, he sees the guy and asks why his sweet little brother decided to pretend he didn't notice him. Hayden says that if he wants a fight, he doesn't need one. The older brother says he doesn't want to fight, but just wanted to say hello. Then, he asks if he likes that he and his mother get along so well. Hayden tells Lennon Hills to shut up. The black-haired guy says he knew his mom was all for that kind of relationship. Then he suggests he watch his language next time, unless he wants to end up a servant. At that moment, Hayden thought that he was right. But even after such words, he couldn't hate him. And this angered him even more, because he loved the one who didn't value him at all. And he thought that he wished Ellie would console him now. The young gentleman reflects on the fact that he doesn't know where she disappeared to. If he had known she would disappear so suddenly, he would have persuaded her to stay, and would have been gentler with her. Hayden realizes she's consoled him countless times, and he couldn't even do anything for her. Then he puts his hand on his gun and thinks he's pathetic. The boy takes the weapon and thinks he'd better fall into eternal sleep. But suddenly, he sees a letter of recommendation from her father. It states that the mute Ellie is only capable of listening attentively to him, and if he confides his secrets to her, she won't be able to tell them to anyone. Hayden wondered why his father was offering such strange services. He realized he hadn't even considered what was wrong with the woman. He'd simply gone to her father and signed a contract with him, and so the guy thinks he's out of his mind. Even though he knows it cost a lot of money, he decided it was worth it, and he understands that, in any case, if he commits suicide, he won't need the money anymore. The young gentleman believes that no matter how foolish it was to confess his secret, he couldn't help himself at their first meeting. He revealed his attraction to men and felt relieved. Hayden thought it might be best to keep seeing Ellie, as he felt much better after their meetings. But one day, the young gentleman met her under strange circumstances. And when he saw the girl with his brother, he became curious about why they were together, and suggested that he might also be Ellie's client. Hayden understands that a brother like him has secrets too, and he desperately wants to know them. Therefore, he believes that destroying him and becoming the head of the family will make up for his miserable feelings. However, the young gentleman's decision changed. He wondered if there was some kind of medicine that would allow her to speak. And then he thought about how he couldn't allow this idiot to take advantage of her. Hayden tells the girl he'll help her escape from here, and he understands that even if she hadn't intended to tell Lennon's secret, he would have helped her anyway. However, the next day, she simply ran away without even thanking him. Ellie suddenly disappeared. The young gentleman couldn't understand why and believed he only wanted to help her. He also wondered if he would never see her again. And at that moment, he thought that if it weren't for her, he would have committed suicide. Hayden decides he must find her, and he will spare no expense. He tried to find a similar girl, but none of them came close to the real Ellie, and so he still hasn't figured out where she is. When the young gentleman entered the pub, he saw Ellie's father and wondered how much he had drunk because the man couldn't even sit. When the man came to his senses, the gentleman asked where Ellie was. The father, surprised, asked who he was. The man replied that he was Hayden Hills. Hearing this, the man asks in surprise what brought him here at such a late hour. He asks if the father has found his daughter. The man says he doesn't even want to be reminded because he doesn't understand how she could do that to him. Then he claims he quit his job because of her trusting his daughter. At this time, the young gentleman thought that he smelled so strongly of alcohol, and he didn't even try to find her, and thought that he was only interested in drinking. Suddenly, the guy grabs the man by the throat and tells him not to dare say his name with that filthy mouth. Then, with a knife, he cuts off a piece of his finger. At this point, the man fell to the floor and screamed loudly in pain. Hayden suggested he calm down, as no one had ever died from a severed finger. The young gentleman insists that if he lets him down again, he'll cut off everyone else. And when he left the pub, he thought about what else he'll get. Hardwin sat down on the floor and said he needed to rest. The girl asked if she had disappointed him too much with her skills. Then he apologized for having to deal with her. The guy asks who gets it right the first time. He explains that it didn't work for him either. The young gentleman asks the girl if she believed him. She replies that she did. He is surprised that she believed him so immediately, since he thinks she is a very good dancer. Hardwin asks if his words embarrassed her. Then he says that, seriously, she should have praised him too. He figures it's better late than never. Hearing this, the girl doesn't understand what exactly she's supposed to say. Then she asks to be allowed to repeat his words as practice. The guy asks the girl, surprised, if she's making fun of him. She doesn't understand what he's talking about or why she's the one asking him about it. He explains that he just thinks he expected too much from her. Then he apologizes and explains that he was joking. Hardwin asks if she's so serious about Lennon and tomorrow's meeting. She agrees, and then she thinks that even though she misunderstood him, it seems she doesn't need to fix the situation. The young gentleman claims he will protect her Ellie and therefore tells her not to worry. Hearing this, the girl thanked him. The young gentleman says it's going to rain soon because his knees are hurting. Ellie looks out the window and says it looks like it because the sky is overcast. Then the main character asks, surprised if it's too early for him since she thinks he's only 17. He asks if there are any general rules for why his knees might hurt at that age. Ellie looked at the boy and asked if he was okay, and if he was afraid of thunder. The young gentleman said that he was very afraid of thunderstorms. Hearing this, the girl hugs the guy and tells him not to worry since she is next to him. And the main character tells the guy that now he really does look like a 17-year-old and believes that before this, he behaved like an adult. Hardwin says he's terrified of the sound and is afraid to tell the truth about sleeping alone. The young lady asks if he wants them to sleep together. Hearing this, the guy asks in surprise how she can say such a thing without hesitation. The girl doesn't understand what he's talking about and asks if he meant something else. The young gentleman objects and explains that he truly wants to stay with her. Then he says he's afraid to be alone. Hardwin says he's embarrassed to admit it, but he's slept with his sister every time there's a thunderstorm. She tells him not to worry since they've shared a bed many times before. The guy hugs the girl and says that she looks like that, and he is pleased to see her smiling. The young gentleman recalls how once upon a time in his childhood, a terrible thunderstorm broke out. And on that day, he ran into his sister's room, where she lay in bed, unable to wake up. She also remained unconscious for a long time, although she eventually opened her eyes. Hardwin says he's been afraid of thunder ever since, and when he hears the sound, he feels the same fear and sadness he experienced that day. He's overwhelmed by emotion, and that's why he couldn't sleep alone. The guy says that at some point, he decided there was no point in hiding it anymore. However, he hopes to overcome his fear, because he's not sure he'll be able to find someone to stay with him during the thunderstorms. Hearing this, the protagonist asks if he trusts her. He replies that if he didn't, he would have already asked her to leave. Hardwin hugs the girl and tells her there's no point in being afraid of thunder anymore. She asks, surprised, why his hands are shaking then. And then, she thinks there's no point in being afraid, and he means that Hannah is already dead, and now there's no need to worry about her not waking up. The girl says that she will be with him, and therefore suggests that he should not be afraid. And then she suggests that they go to bed, since it is late. Lying in bed, the young man says he can smell her next to him now, not Hannah's. She asks if he likes it. He says he's just curious how much time has passed since then. Ellie replies that it will soon be a year. He says he wants to ask her something, and asks if she had other clients. The girl replies that there was another person, and then apologizes for not telling her about it earlier. The main character asks if he knows Hayden Hills. Hearing this, the guy, surprised, asks if he was also her client. Ellie says that, who knows, and thinks they might see each other tomorrow. Then she says that if they run into each other, she'll pretend they don't know each other. At this point, the protagonist looked at the guy and thought about how disappointed he was in her, and she wondered why she always disappointed Hardwin. The young gentleman looks at the girl and insists he's not disappointed in her, so he suggests she stop making that face. He says that if she's truly sorry, she should take his hand. Ellie took the boy's hand, which was shaking at this point. He says he's glad she told him, because he thinks she could have just kept it a secret. Hardwin insists that it's important to him that she remains safe while she holds the title of Countess. He also simply wants her to be happy and asks if he can wish for that. The girl says she wants him to be happy too, and holds his hand. Then she insists she won't reveal her identity to Hayden. The young gentleman claims she's becoming wiser and wiser every day. The main character invites him to trust her, because she will try her best. He claims he has trusted her for a long time. The next morning, the young gentleman asks Ellie if she's ready, and when he sees her, he's struck by her beauty. Ellie tells the guy that he looks great and understands that today is such an important event, and that's why he tried. The main character says that it is better to hurry because you don't want them to be late. The girl looked at the guy and asked why he was like this. She also asked if his knees still hurt. He assured her everything was fine and asked her to hurry. Hardwin tells the girl it's hard to take her eyes off her. She asks if she can do it. He says it will, and he'll be there to support her. So he suggests they act normally, talk to him, and smile. Ellie asks if that means looking only at him. He replies, yes. And at that moment, the main character thought that if she was with Harvin, everything would be fine. The young gentleman says that Hannah's smile gestures and gait must all be remembered and imitated precisely. At this point, he wonders if his sister is watching them. And then he says that if she is, then please let her support them. When they arrived, the girl was surprised because she saw a lot of people. Hardwin asks Hannah if she'll dance with him when the new song comes on. He then hands her a glass of wine for her to sip. Ellie thought about how she didn't see Lennon among the people, but she thought he seemed to be somewhere nearby. And since this banquet was hosted by the Imperial Palace, it would be strange to encounter knights like Labrador there. Suddenly, the main character sees Hayden. He approaches the girl and says his name is Hayden Hills. He claims it was a huge honor for him to meet hers. The main character says that it is nice to meet you, and that her name is Hannah Favre. At this time, her brother comes up to them and says that his name is Hardwin February. Hayden says he's extremely honored to meet them, as he wanted to see with his own eyes the Countess who refused to marry his older brother. He then tells her she's very beautiful. Hearing this, the girl thanked the gentleman, and then she thought she didn't understand why she was so worried. Then she announced that they were leaving. Suddenly, Lennon approaches them and says he sees a lot of familiar faces. He's especially happy to meet Hannah. The girl said she was also glad to meet him. And at that moment, she thought about how he simply couldn't help but come. The man with scarlet eyes asks how she's feeling. She replies that she's still not feeling well and tells him not to worry. Lennon says he's sorry to hear that, then asks if she's thought about what he told her last time. The young gentleman reminds her that the woman he's looking for has silver hair. And about a month ago, an eyewitness saw two women with similar hair color getting into a carriage. He then asks if she'd be interested in hearing the results. Hearing this, the main character wondered if he was going to discuss it right there. Then she said she was so busy that she completely forgot about it and apologized. Lennon asks if this is true, and also wonders what kind of bad luck this is. At this time, Ellie thought that she had nothing to breathe, and then she apologized and left. Hardwin asks where she's going. The girl replies that she's going to freshen up. Her brother asks if he should come with her. She replies that he shouldn't, since she's not a child. The main character stepped out into the hallway and thought about how it was easier to breathe when there was no one around. But suddenly, she heard footsteps and realized she hadn't even felt anyone following her. Ellie started walking quickly, and at that moment, she thought she was being followed. When she turned around, she saw Lennon. The young gentleman grabs the girl by the hand and then pins her against the wall. He asks her if she's interested in the story about the carriage. The protagonist explains that she said she had no time for it. He reports that the carriage was heading to Countess Favre's mansion. Hearing this, the girl thought that she shouldn't panic, since Lennon didn't know what was happening in the mansion anyway. Then she asks the guy if he wants her to be the one he's looking for. He says that the young lady says that she is very sorry to upset him, but she is not that person. Hearing this, Lennon insists he knows she's doing this for him. Then he says he doesn't care at all, that he's too young to accept the title, and if she wants to help him become an earl, then let her. Mr. Hill says that if she wants to keep everything about Hannah a secret, then he won't ask any unnecessary questions. Hearing this, the main character thought that he knew the truth, and therefore would clearly want to completely control her, making her his doll. Lennon says he just wants to see her and talk to her. She says that's rude and suggests he let her go. The young gentleman says she can play the role of the Countess until the very end, and he will watch Ellie, says that if he wants her to be that person for him, then she can. Lennon objects and explains that he's not looking for a replacement, as he only wants Ellie. Hearing this, Ellie wonders if he truly loves her. The protagonist thought she was a commoner, while Lennon had met countless beautiful and elegant aristocrats along the way, and she couldn't understand why he couldn't let her go. The girl thinks that she is not as good as those noblewomen, and she wonders why he does not leave her. Lennon touched the girl's hand and said that she was trembling, and said that if she wasn't afraid, he would understand who she really was, and suggested that she not bury herself in lies. And then he left. At this time, the main character thought that she should run and throw all unnecessary thoughts out of her head, and then she runs up to Lennon and thinks that she should go to the end. The girl tells the guy not to wallow in lies and grabs his hand. She reminds him that he lied about feeling sad because of that woman named Ellie, and then she tells him that he's actually in love with her. Hearing this, Lennon was surprised. The young lady continued to say that if he wanted the girl he loved to be happy, he should respect her choice, and so she suggested he stop chasing after the woman who left him without a word. The main character asks him if he thinks it's rude. Then she asks him not to be so rude to her again, as this is her last warning. When the girl returned to the hall, the young gentleman Favre asked why she had been gone for so long. She explained that she had gotten a little lost and asked if he had been worried about her. Hardwin says that if she didn't know he would be worried, then she shouldn't have provoked him, and then hugs the girl and says that if she had stayed just one more minute, he would have gone looking for her. The brother explains that after she left, all the Hills brothers disappeared, so he wondered if they had followed her. Hearing this, the protagonist smiled and thought about how she would need to tell him later about her meeting with Len. She told him not to worry, as she believed the main thing was that she had returned and everything was fine. The young gentleman looked at her and said she was being disingenuous. The girl explained that perhaps it was her talent. Hearing this, the young man smiled. Ellie looked into the hall and saw girls who couldn't take their eyes off the Hardwin. About Hardwin in society, that Hannah's younger brother was not at all interested in the social world, that he was ugly or crippled, and there were many such rumors. Ellie realizes Hardwin has shown a very cool side. He asks the girl if she will dance with him, and she agrees. The main character tells the guy that she always feels so comfortable talking to him, and then she thinks about how funny she can be when they're together. Although she understands that she made a lot of mistakes yesterday, she shouldn't dwell on that now because she thinks she just needs to try harder. After the dance, the girl turns to her brother and tells him they did it well. He tells her she did a great job and thinks it's right, and she's very happy to see it now. After the ball, the young people were returning home and saw a beautiful sunset. Hardwin asks the girl how she felt today and asks if she had had a hard time. Ellie says she'd be lying if she said it was easy. The young gentleman asks if she regrets agreeing to their request. Hearing this, the main character is surprised and asks if he thinks she regrets it. He replies no, and the lady says he's a good man and suggests they don't even start. Hardwin insists she will never regret it. She asks where he can be so sure. He explains that he will try to prevent that from happening. Ellie asks the guy why he's so kind to her, and she wonders if he pities her, or if it's because she agreed to help him. The young gentleman replies that it's both, and there are other reasons as well. And so he can't see anything specific and acts as his heart dictates. Hardwin says he wanted to give someone his attention. Suddenly, the main character doesn't understand why they're dancing, especially with Lennon. She realizes they're not just dancing, but he's leading her, and he tells her his feelings were a lie. At this point, the protagonist doesn't understand why she doesn't want to escape from there, and she feels that she doesn't want to leave him. Lennon says that if he said it was love and asks what she would do, then… Suddenly, the girl heard a voice calling her name, and when she opened her eyes, she saw Hardwin telling them they were already there. Ellie realized it was a dream. The young gentleman asks if she's okay, seeing that she looks tired. She replies that everything is fine. And then she thinks, what if it's true that Lennon loves her? And doesn't understand whether she should love him too. The protagonist believes Lennon has always been good, and at least for her, he never harmed her. But she understands that she is not obligated to accept his love. Ellie tells the guy that when she left, Lennon followed her. He said he found the carriage he and Hannah left in, and that he doesn't care that she's not the real Hannah, and all he wants is her. The young lady says he also said he'd help them. Then she asks what Hardwin thinks about that. The young gentleman says his opinion hasn't changed, and he doesn't trust him. Then he asks if she wants to ask him for help. The girl replies that she's not sure, but she doesn't want to do anything he won't like. Hearing this, the guy says he's pleased. Madeline informs Hardwin that a letter has arrived. The young lady asks who sent it. He replies, "My uncle." The main character asks if the uncle is the one who wants the title of Count. The guy says he wrote that he'd drop by for a bit, but he didn't mention the purpose. And then it occurred to her that he clearly had a reason for visiting. The girl thought that Lennon might have sent him, and then she thought that he couldn't have stooped that low. Hardwin suggests Ellie practice Hannah's arrogance. He says his sister was very rude to their uncle, and as a brother, this deeply embarrassed him. Ellie says she doesn't even know if she can do the same. Y Dios. And at that moment, she wondered if she could replicate Hannah's behavior well. The young gentleman tells the girl to try speaking to him arrogantly. Therefore, she shouldn't introduce her uncle, but simply speak. The girl says she wants him to be rougher. Then she asks him how he likes it, because she thinks she did a good job. Hardwin asks if she wanted him to be rougher, and then makes a sad face. The girl looks at him, then objects, saying, "It's a misunderstanding, and she'll never say that again." And she starts crying. The guy apologizes and explains he was joking. He insists he won't make that joke again. He promises he'll never be rude to her again. The young lady asks if he's making fun of her again. He demurs and says he'll think about it. Meanwhile, Lennon, lying in bed again, remembers Ellie, who he dreamed about. He realizes he's been having this dream every night since Ellie disappeared. He doesn't know why he keeps having it, and he wants to get rid of it, but doesn't know how. The young gentleman thought that sleep would leave him if Ellie returned to him, and he recalled Hannah's words that he was in love with her. Lennon thought that despite the fact that he considered her different and saw her every night in his dreams, his heart quickened when he looked at hers. The young gentleman wonders if these could be considered symptoms of falling in love, and he's never thought of it that way before. But whatever the case, he's certain that Hannah Fevro is Ellie. The Duke realizes that she confused him at their first meeting, because she didn't act like Ellie at all. When Lennon was learning about his brother and sister, he discovered that they had a cousin named Baltan Roymon, Katoragonic named the Fallen Baron. And so obtaining information was easy. The Baron revealed that Hannah had suffered from a serious illness since childhood. It was a genetic disorder, the same one that had killed the previous Count of Favre. Because the brother and sister of February lost their parents early, everyone began to persecute them in order to obtain the title of Count. Therefore, Hannah and Hardwin became very close. Hearing this, the Duke thought that if it was a genetic disease, then Hannah knew she would die. Hardwin couldn't take the earldom because he was still very young, and Hannah didn't want to give the title to cousins she didn't trust. The young gentleman speculates that Ellie most likely ran away because of her father. Hannah, however, took her in because she needed some refuge. As a result, Ellie became heir to the Countess's title until Hardwin came of age. Lennon thought about how he didn't care what the reason was. What mattered was that Ellie had dumped him. She'd pretended to be with Hannah and fooled him, But he thought it was all pointless since that boy had given her away. The young gentleman realized he didn't look at his sisters that way. And then he thought that only she could smile like that when he saw her smile. Garaf reflects on how he wants her more and more. He also wants to lock her in his little cage so that only he can watch her. The Baron came to the Duke and said he was pleased to meet him. The young gentleman explained that he invited him to learn more about Countess' favors. Bolton asks if he can also ask why he's so interested in the Countess. He replies that he won't hide it and reveals that he's in love with her, but she refused his engagement, and it seems that being Lennon Hills isn't enough for her. The young gentleman explains that this is why he decided to find out more about her, as he believes that he can find a way to please the Countess. The Baron listened to the gentleman, said that he was sincere in his feelings, and he did not understand how she could reject him. Lennon says that in any case, in exchange for any useful information, he will help restore his reputation. And then he thinks about what he can't guarantee. Until he inherits the dukedom, his hands are tied. Bolton Raymond says he is ready to tell him everything he knows. After a while, the young gentleman realized he hadn't said anything interesting. He asked if Countess Hannah was suffering from some kind of bronchial ailment. The Baron says he can't give a definitive answer here, and therefore apologizes. He recalls that he's never seen Hannah cough. He then says that's all he knows and asks if he was able to help him in any way. The Duke says he has one more request. He wants him to come to Countess Favor in person and tell her he doubts she's the real Countess. Hearing this, the Baron asks in surprise if Hannah is being replaced by someone else. He replies that he can't say for sure, but he'd like to verify this information. Then he declares that if he interferes where he's not wanted, he'll take everything he has. Lennon says that if he doesn't want to do this, then just let him do what he tells him to. The Baron said he understood, and at that moment, he thought that this gentleman wasn't one to throw words to the wind. Therefore, he needed to be listened to and do as he wished, because that way he could regain his lost titles and wealth. Bolton Raymond announces that he'll be going to the Countess's tomorrow. Then he asks Lennon if that's hibiscus tea. The young gentleman asks if he liked the tea. The Baron says that's not the issue, but rather that Hannah was allergic to hibiscus. Bolton says he used to visit the Countess often. One day he brought back some hibiscus, and as soon as she drank it, a rash appeared on her face, and it seems she herself didn't know she was allergic to hibiscus. Lennon says he understands, and that means the girl he likes has this terrible allergy. He smiles and asks if Hardwin knows about it. He replies that he's not sure since the young gentleman was studying at the academy at the time. The Duke asks if there were any witnesses to this that day. The Baron says several of Hannah's personal servants were present. At this point, the young gentleman thought that Hardwin might not know about this, but there was a witness. He believed they were in for a very interesting scene. The next day, the knight approaches the captain and asks what he's been thinking about lately. He then claims he's been daydreaming. Labrador objects saying that's not true, and explains that no matter how detached he is, no one could even touch him with a sword. The knight says he's just worried about him. He replies that there's no need, and then leaves. At this point, the Labrador doesn't understand how he's supposed to find out information about Lennon, believing he's not the type to show his weaknesses to others. The guy reflects on the fact that no matter how hard he tries, he still can't find out anything about Lennon. A Labrador lost in his thoughts met a girl, and during their meeting, he bumped into her. He apologized, but she said it was nothing. The guy thought that he was seeing this girl for the first time and thought she was his new crush Lennon. He thought she was strange because she reminded him of Ellie. On the way, he met a man he'd never seen before. When he entered Lennon's office, he asked if he'd had any visitors and wondered if he'd arrived at the wrong time. Labrador noticed that the gentleman had been drinking this red tea a lot lately, and he couldn't remember what it was called. At this time, Hardwin reflected on how he had lost his parents early in life, and recently also Hannah. And so he felt very unhappy, but his heart was touched by Ellie, who reminded him so much of Hannah. At first, the young gentleman simply sympathized with her and wanted to take care of her when he learned she had run away from home because she was being bullied. But one day he woke up to find Ellie comforting him. The guy reflects on how that was the first time he leaned on someone other than Hannah, and then he realized he could trust her. He also wonders how long it will take for them to fully trust each other. Hardwin recalls that Ellie didn't answer that question at the time, and at that moment he thought he trusted her completely, but he didn't want to admit it to Ellie because he was afraid she wasn't ready to confide in him yet. Knife believes he'll definitely ask her later. Lying in bed, the young gentleman can't sleep. He reflects on how his uncle never came here without a reason before. He realizes he wouldn't have come here without a reason. He also wonders what his uncle is up to. The guy went out onto the balcony and looked at the stars and wondered if they could handle all of this. Hardwin saw a girl sitting on the bench. Then he took a blanket and went to her. The young gentleman asks the lady what she is doing there, as it is cold outside, and she is naked. The young woman explains that she couldn't sleep and asks why he came here. He replies that he wanted to get some fresh air on the balcony, and when he noticed her, decided to join him. The guy tells her to throw a blanket over herself, since arrogant Hannah should not catch a cold. The girl says that since he has come, he should sit down. He agrees. Ellie says she's been thinking about Hannah more than usual today, and she finds it strange because they only spent a short time together, and she remembers everything down to the smallest detail. Hearing this, Hardwin asks if she misses Hannah. The girl replies that she does. He says that he does too. Ellie asks if they'll visit her later, as she thinks they should tell Hannah that everything is fine here. The main character asks the guy why he so rarely says what he really feels, and at that moment, she thinks it's just too direct a question. Hardwin says she can be honest with him, but she shouldn't be with anyone else. He explains that they might misunderstand her. Not everyone is good, and she should sometimes be able to hide her feelings. He says he hopes she doesn't get into any trouble. The girl doesn't understand why she can only be honest with him and asks about it. He explains that it's because she can trust him more than anyone else. Hearing this, the main character smiled and agreed with him. Then she said that she trusted him more than anyone else. Ellie tells the guy that he is very sweet, and at times like these, she is glad that she has a friend. The girl noticed the boy's expression change. She asked him what was wrong, and wondered if he didn't like the fact that she considered him her friend. She said it seemed he preferred to consider them accomplices. Hardwin explains that he just wants to be with her. The woman is surprised and asks what he said. The guy replies, "Nothing." The woman asks what he means by, "I want to be with her." The young gentleman explains that she can be so sincere, but sometimes she doesn't understand the obvious, and he can't even be angry with her about it. The young lady says she can't be angry with him either. The young gentleman tells the girl to go into the house already because he doesn't want her to get sick. The girl asks if it's okay if they don't sleep together tonight. Hearing this, he suggests she stop teasing him. The next day, the young people played checkers, and the guy won. Then he suggests the girl get ready for a flick. Hearing this, the young woman asks if he'll hit her again, saying it hurts. The guy says they'll get away with it today. Then he gives her his jacket to put on, as he thinks she might get cold. Meanwhile, the protagonist doesn't understand what's wrong with her dress. Then she turns to Hardwin and asks why his nose is bleeding. The guy explains that he must be tired, so he tells her not to think it's because he's having dirty thoughts. He insists he's simply overworked. The maid announces that Baron Baltan has arrived. The young gentleman asks the girl if she is ready. At this point, the protagonist thinks that everything will be fine, and then says that she should come in since she is not alone. Hardwin turns to his uncle and asks how he's doing. Then he says that, frankly, they didn't expect him to show up so suddenly. The Baron replies that he's not doing well. When Ellie looked at him, she thought his gaze reminded her of her father. "I think she needs to pull herself together and keep a straight face." The young woman says she's glad to hear it. Her uncle says she's still the same, and he doesn't understand how she can talk to him like that. He also recalls that she looked plumper the last time they saw each other. The girl says she can't seem to get a bite out of her mouth ever since they received the letter about his arrival. Then she claims she hasn't forgotten how he wanted to take their title of count for himself. The Baron explains that they were still young at the time, so he temporarily took over as head of the family. He then asserts that he thought they had long since resolved the misunderstanding. The young lady said she really wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding. And at that moment, she thought about how she'd been worried she wouldn't be able to be cheeky, but it turned out to be much easier. The Baron informs him that in any case, he has brought a gift with him in honor of his long absence and offers to bring it. Hearing this, the maid was surprised because she did not understand whether he looked like a man who gives gifts. The uncle informs her that he's brought tea leaves that are hard to find in this area. He then suggests that the girl, rather than looking at him, try the tea. Ellie wondered if he'd put poison in it. Hardwin said it was hibiscus. Then he asked if he'd put anything in the tea. The Baron says it's rude to talk to him like that. Then he asks why he would put something in there and says that if they don't believe him, he can try it first. When the man finished drinking his cup of tea, he asked if they were sure, then explained that it was just regular tea. He then asked the girl if she knew what it was made of. The young lady asks if it's hibiscus tea. Her uncle says it means she remembers. Hearing this, the main character remembered that she and Hannah had already drunk this tea once, and at that moment, she thought that she should drink it. Ellie drank her tea and thanked her uncle for the gift. Then she said it was so fragrant. Seeing this, the uncle asks who she is. Then he tells her that Hanu, whom he knew was allergic to hibiscus. Then crying out, he says that nothing happened to her, and he doesn't understand why. Hardwin asks what he's talking about and says that this is the first time he's heard that Hannah was allergic to him. Uncle claims it's true, and when he was at the academy, he drank tea with Hannah and personally witnessed her rash. His words can be corroborated by a servant and the doctor who treated the girl at the time. At this point, the main character thought he'd revealed them. Her brother asks her uncle why he offered Hannah the tea, knowing she was allergic. He replies that he thought Hannah wouldn't drink it when she found out it contained hibiscus. Ellie thought about how they really had been caught, and she didn't know what to do, and wondered if maybe she should just tell them she wasn't allergic anymore. She wondered what Hannah would do in her place now. Lennon says he came without permission because it was too loud and asks what happened. Seeing him, the main character does not understand what this young duke is doing here. The Countess's room without permission. He says he is a duke and asks who he is. The man says he's their uncle, Baltan Raymond. He then says they're having a confidential conversation and asks if he could come by later. The duke asks if he's the odd man out. Then he approaches Countess Hannah and says she smells delicious and wonders if it's hibiscus tea. Lennon asks if she can finally drink the tea. He claims he's very happy for her. He says he remembers her telling him she dreamed of drinking the tea but couldn't because she was allergic to hibiscus. The Duke says that after which he gave her allergy medicine and asks if she really remembers. The young gentleman recalls that she then smiled at him and said that she would marry him if it was effective. Hearing this, Ellie understood what Lennon was trying to achieve. She believed he was helping her for one purpose only, to later insist on marriage. The Duke touches the lady's hands and says he hopes she hasn't forgotten her promise. They ask if she sees herself marrying him now. The main character thinks it's best to play along with the Duke for now. She says his medicine worked, but her hands still tremble. Lennon says he'll try to find an effective cure, then a zatiemon. He turns to the Baron and asks if he's still out of place. The Duke says that if Baltan bothers Hannah again, he will take it personally. Lennon grabs the girl's hand and asks her to go. Meanwhile, Hardwin grabs the girl's other hand and asks her not to go. At this time, the main character thought that if she didn't go with Lennon now, she was afraid to even imagine what he could do to her. Ellie tells her brother that she thinks it would be better for him to stay here and solve all the problems. The Duke turns to the girl and tells her he wanted to help her. Hearing this, she thanks him for his help. And at that moment, she realizes she finds him suspicious. The main character contemplates the idea of actually pulling off something like this in the spirit of Lennon. He is, after all, the heir to the Hills family. Ellie realizes he seems sincere, and that's why she's unsure of anything. He tells her he didn't do it out of the kindness of his heart. Then he asks if she remembers what he said a minute ago. At this point, the main character thought about how she didn't want to answer. Then she asked why he suddenly decided to come visit them. Lennon explains that he wanted to respond to what she said to him in the banquet hall. When he arrived, the servants informed him that she was in the drawing room. The young gentleman explains that he then heard strange sounds and went in without thinking. He realized the woman he was very interested in was in trouble and thought she needed his help. The Count says that some man doubted that she was a countess, and he says that he saw her trembling at that moment, and that's why he simply couldn't leave things as they were. Lennon claims he felt he had to save her. Ellie says he's quite an insightful person. Then she asks why he speaks to her informally. The young gentleman said that the fact that she wasn't allergic to hibiscus was proof that she was Ellie. Then he asked how much longer she planned to deceive him. The Count asks how long she intends to help that child. He tells her that if she had told him everything right away, nothing bad would have happened. Lennon says she told him he's obsessed with her because he's in love. But if he sees love as a desire to keep his beloved close, then asks if she'll be with him. The girl pushes him away and says she doesn't know. And at that moment, she thinks she doesn't know what to do or how to properly refuse him. The Duke says everything is fine, and so she doesn't have to answer. However, she must know that he is ready to do anything for her, and in return, she must look only at him and obey him. He believes that this way they will always be happy. Hearing this, the protagonist remembered her father, how he used to tell her not to speak, but to simply listen to others. And she doesn't understand how he could say such a thing to her. Ellie thought about how he wanted her to live her life as she pleased. She didn't understand why he was trying to control her now. She also wondered if he truly loved her, or just wanted her to love him. The young lady offers to give her time to think. He asks how much time she needs, and also inquires about how long it will take for the child to become an earl. Lennon says he's not prepared to wait that long. The Duke asks the girl if they can see each other tomorrow. He also wants them to see each other more often and spend time together. The girl agrees and says that she will come to him tomorrow and that he should return home today. Hearing this, the young gentleman thought it was very appropriate, and he was already looking forward to tomorrow. He said he'd make her some hibiscus tea, as he thought it would actually make her allergic to it. When the main character entered the house, she thought she was very tired. Madeline asked the lady if everything was okay, and also inquired if she was cold. The lady replied that everything was fine. Ellie asks where Hardwin and her uncle are. The maid replies that they've left. Then she suggests the lady sit down and have some tea, as she's just brewed a new one. She thinks it will warm her up and make her feel better. Madeline says Ellie must have been really scared. Then she tells us that in fact, she didn't know the Countess had an allergy either, even though she's been working here for a long time. And so she believes that after that incident, Countess Hannah must have simply gotten rid of the hibiscus completely. The maid suggests that the mistress should not blame herself, as she believes that perhaps this was a test that she needed to pass.